The sky is black with storm clouds, and the sea
path
below
ahead
churns
is
with
fraught
ancient
with peril.
fury. Imagine
Our
standing
scouts
on the
have
deck
found
of a
a way.
Viking ship, the wind screaming in your ears, the salt stinging your eyes, and the roar of thunder echoing like the voice of an angry god. In that moment, one could almost believe the stories sung by the old skalds, stories of an ending that would tear the world apart. The Vikings called it Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, a vision of wolves devouring the sun and moon, oceans boiling with serpents, and fire raining down from the heavens. To them, this was not a distant dream. It was fate. It was a destiny written into the very fabric of existence. The Norse believed the world was not eternal. Unlike many ancient civilizations who imagine a universe that cycled endlessly or stretched forward without end, the Vikings lived with a constant knowledge that everything would one day collapse. Even their gods, mighty Odin, brave Thor, and beautiful Freyja, were destined to die. This was a worldview steeped in tragedy and inevitability, but also in grim courage. To live knowing the end is unavoidable is to live fiercely in the present, and this is perhaps why the Viking people clung so tightly to their myth of Ragnarok. But the most haunting part is this. These were not only fireside tales told to frighten children. They were encoded in verse, carved into stone, and passed down with the weight of prophecy. The runes, the strange angular symbols etched into wood, bone, and rock, were not simply a form of writing. They were seen as fragments of cosmic truth. Odin himself had sacrificed for them, hanging for 9 long nights upon the great world tree, pierced by his own spear, until the mysteries of the runes revealed themselves to him. If the gods bled to bring runes into the world, how much power did these symbols truly hold? Were they warnings, messages, or perhaps glimpses of a future humanity could not avoid? Across Scandinavia, rune stones stand like silent witnesses. To the casual eye, they are memorials, names carved into stone to honor the dead. But to those who look deeper, some of these inscriptions whisper of darker things, battles that shake the sky, winters that never end, and shadows that swallow the sun. They hint that the people who carved them may have believed they were living in the shadow of an approaching doom. The question is not simply whether the Vikings believed in Ragnarok, but whether they thought they had already seen its signs. Consider what they lived through. Sudden climate shifts, long winters that froze crops, volcanic ash clouds that blotted out the sun, plagues that spread like fire through the villages. To a people who believed that nature itself was alive with gods and monsters, these disasters could not have been coincidences. Each event must have seemed like a step on the road to Ragnarok. When the sea surged and swallowed whole coastlines, was that not the serpent Jörmungandr stirring in the deep? When wolves howled in the night during an endless winter, was that not Fenrir's echo, promising he would one day devour the sun? The opening of this story, then, is not just about myth but about fear. The fear of watching the natural world turn against you, of sensing a pattern behind the chaos. That is what made the Norse myths so haunting. They were not distant fantasies. They were rooted in the lived experience of people who felt small before the wrath of the world. The runes may have been their attempt to make sense of it, to capture warnings for the generations that would come after them. And so we return to the storm, the ship tossed upon dark waters. A skald chants in the gloom, his voice rising above the howl of the wind. He speaks of the end to come, a great wolf snapping its jaws upon the sun, fire giants marching from the south, and a final battle on the fields of Vigrid. The Cool listens, not with disbelief, but with grim acceptance. This is their fate, their inheritance, their story. To the Norse, the end was already written. But here's the mystery that draws us deeper. What if Ragnarok was not just a myth? What if the runes, the stones, the verses were not only symbolic but records of real catastrophes, warnings preserved in coded form? What if the Vikings were not merely imagining the end of the world, but predicting it? The first whispers of this possibility come from a single ancient stone, carved more than 1,000 years ago. It speaks not only of memory but of terror, of battles in the sky, and of a sun that vanished. Scholars have struggled to decode it, torn between treating it as poetry or prophecy. Yet its voice remains. And so begins our journey, through storm and fire, through poetry and prophecy, through myth and memory. We will walk among the runed stones, listen to the whispers of the skalds, and search for the truth behind the most haunting question of all. Did the Vikings, in their strange, powerful runes, predict the end of the world? In the world of the Vikings, words were not just sound carried by breath, and writing was not merely the scratching of symbols into wood or stone. For them, Runes were fragments of the divine, sharp lines of mystery cut from the bones of the universe itself. The very word rune meant secret or whisper, suggesting knowledge hidden, forbidden, or reserved for those brave enough to seek it. Unlike the alphabets of Rome or Greece, the runes were never just a tool of trade or administration. They were seen as a gift of the gods, shimmering with magic, dangerous in the wrong hands, and powerful in the right ones. The myth of their origin tells us everything we need to know about how sacred they were. Odin, the All-Father, the god who sacrificed more than any other, was said to have hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 long nights. He pierced his own side with a spear, suspended between life and death, gazing into the abyss of the cosmos. Without food, without drink, suffering in silence, he stared until his vision cracked open. At the edge of death, he saw them, the runes, etched in the roots of existence, timeless symbols glowing with meaning. With a cry, Odin seized them, pulling them into the world of gods and men. He collapsed, wounded and transformed, now master of wisdom so profound it could shape fate itself. This myth reveals something chilling. To possess runes was to possess destiny. They were not neutral symbols. They were alive, vibrating with a memory of sacrifice. To carve a rune was to call upon cosmic forces. To speak a rune was to bind oneself to its truth. It is no wonder, then, that Viking warriors, farmers, and poets treated them with reverence and fear. Runes appeared in many forms. Some were scratched onto amulets or pieces of bone and carried as charms of protection, luck, or love. Others were cut into weapons, swords, axes, and shields, so that the steel itself would sing with magic in the heat of battle. Rune stones, towering monuments carved with elaborate inscriptions, stood at crossroads and grave sites, proclaiming legacies of kings, warriors, and entire families. But woven through these uses was something more, the sense that runes were never just for recording names or dates. They were used for divination, to cast lots and see what the future held. They were carved into spells, to heal or to harm. They were, in the deepest sense, the intersection of language and magic. Imagine a seers, a vulva, sitting by the fire in a Viking hall. She holds a pouch of rune-carved sticks, each bearing a different symbol, some resembling trees, others lightning bolts, others twisted branches of fate. She scatters them onto the floor, studies their patterns, and sees what others cannot. In the runes, she perceives omens of journeys, of betrayals, of storms, and of death. To those gathered around her, these are not mere guesses or games. These are messages from beyond, words carried from the realm of gods to the ears of mortals. But here lies the deeper mystery. What if the runes were not just mystical tools, but also coded systems of knowledge? The runes were shaped by sharp angles, perfect for carving into wood and stone. But scholars today believe their forms may also reflect patterns, astronomical cycles, numerology, even hidden ciphers. The Vikings had no paper, no scrolls, no vast libraries to hold their knowledge. What they had was stone, and what they carved into it had to carry meaning across centuries. Could it be that runes were their way of encoding truths too dangerous or too sacred to speak aloud? Some inscriptions appear simple at first, names of warriors, praises of gods, victories won. But then there are the strange ones. Stones that speak in riddles, in fragments, in verses that seem to allude to something vast and terrible, the death of the sun, the approach of giants, a winter without end. These are not memorials. They are warnings. And the Vikings did not carve such warnings lightly. There is also something unusual in how the Vikings saw time. To them, the world moved not in a straight line but in cycles, life, death, and rebirth, repeating endlessly. The runes, with their fixed shapes but infinite meanings, mirrored this worldview. A rune drawn today might speak of a past event, a present danger, or a future catastrophe. To carve it into stone was to anchor it, to make its power resonate across generations. Could it be, then, that when the Vikings carved their visions of doom into runes, they were not describing a mythic story but pointing to a pattern they had seen before? A cycle that would come again? The power of runes lay not only in their form but in their silence. Unlike words that vanish once spoken, runes remain. They endure the rain, the snow, the centuries. They stand in fields where villages have long since vanished, whispering the same messages to us that they once whispered to those who carved them. Yet much of their meaning has been lost. We look at them now and see symbols, marks, scratches. But to the Norse, these were alive, pulsing with fate. In this sense, runes were both personal and universal. A warrior might carve them into his sword for strength, but that same symbol might appear on a stone foretelling cosmic doom. This duality is what makes them so fascinating. They lived in both worlds, the world of men and the world of gods. And here we find ourselves standing on the threshold of mystery. If runes were more than writing, if they were codes of fate, then what exactly were the Vikings trying to tell us when they carved their prophecies into stone? Were they attempting to leave behind warnings of natural disasters they had already seen? Were they whispering of patterns in the stars, of cycles of fire and ice? Or were they telling us that Ragnarok, the end of all things, was not just a story, but a future event already inscribed in the bones of time? The runes, after all, are still here. The stones still speak, even if we no longer understand their language. And it is to one of these stones, the most haunting, the most enigmatic, that we must now turn. For it is said to hold the oldest apocalypse carved into human memory, and perhaps the first whisper of the end of the world. Imagine waking one morning to find the world dimmed, the familiar sun above not blazing but veiled in a strange, unnatural twilight. The birds fall silent, the crops within the field, and the people whisper in fear that the gods themselves have turned their faces away. For the Vikings and their ancestors, the sky was not a passive backdrop. It was alive, filled with omens, messages, and warnings. And when the sun went dark, even for a few hours, it was not just an eclipse, it was a sign of Ragnarok. The Norse myths tell us that wolves, the monstrous children of chaos, chased the sun and the moon across the heavens. When they caught their prey, darkness would descend. This myth was not an idle tale. It was a way to explain the terrifying spectacle of a solar eclipse. In an age without telescopes, without astronomy, how else could one understand the sudden disappearance of the sun? But for the Vikings, an eclipse was more than a natural phenomenon. It was a shudder in the fabric of the cosmos, proof that the end was written and that the beasts of chaos would one day win. Yet the darkness of the sky was not always brief. Across northern Europe, historical records and scientific evidence tell us of longer, stranger nights, of years when the sun itself seemed to fade. In the year 536 AD, nearly 3 centuries before the height of Viking power, a volcanic eruption somewhere in the northern hemisphere, perhaps Iceland, perhaps beyond, cast a veil of ash across the skies. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun shone like the moon for over a year. Crops failed, famine spread, and cold summers gripped the land. Modern science confirms this catastrophe, noting layers of volcanic ash in the ice of Greenland. For the people of Scandinavia, who lived through this long twilight, it must have felt like the first verse of Ragnarok itself. The memory of such disasters does not vanish. It lingers in myth, in story, in ritual. The myth of Fimbulwinter, a winter that lasts 3 years without respite, may well be the echo of such an event. Imagine huddling in the longhouses, the firelight flickering against wooden walls, while outside the fields lie barren and the livestock starve. In such conditions, stories of the world's ending were not entertainment. They were explanations, ways to make sense of why the gods would allow such suffering. Even later, during the Viking Age itself, the sky offered more signs. Eclipses still came, and comets sometimes streaked across the heavens, fiery tails unfurling like banners of doom. The aurora borealis, the northern lights, dance across the skies in green and red flames. For us, these are natural wonders. But for the Vikings, they were reminders that the heavens were restless, that the great battle of gods and giants might already be stirring. But perhaps the most haunting question is this: did the runes capture these events? When carvers etched their cryptic verses into stone, were they preserving memories of ash-darkened skies, of endless winters, of famine and death? The rock runestone, carved in 9th century Sweden, makes reference to the death of the sun, to a battle of powers beyond human comprehension. Scholars debate whether these verses refer to myths or to real catastrophes. Could it be that the stone's creator was remembering a time when the sun indeed vanished, when the world seemed to teeter on the brink of collapse? Consider how memory and myth intertwine. A child who survived the long twilight of 536 AD might grow to adulthood believing he had glimpsed the first tremors of Ragnarok. His grandchildren might repeat the story with awe, turning lived horror into cosmic prophecy. By the time their descendants carved runes into stone, the boundary between memory and myth would have dissolved. The catastrophe was no longer history, it was destiny. This blending of real disaster with mythic prophecy gives the Norse worldview its haunting power. Unlike myths of other cultures, which often spoke of distant golden ages or imagined paradises, the Norse story confronted suffering directly. The gods themselves were doomed. The sun would vanish. The seas would rise. Yet from this despair rose a strange kind of courage. If even the divine cannot escape fate, then neither can we. The only response is to face it with strength, to carve your name in stone, to live so that even the end cannot erase you. As we piece together this worldview, we must remember that the Vikings were not naive. They were astute observers of nature, of the skies, of the cycles of the earth. Their ships crossed oceans by reading the stars. Their farmers survived by reading the seasons. When they spoke of the sun vanishing, it was not pure imagination. It was memory sharpened into myth. And the runes may have been their way of recording what they saw, so that others would never forget. The day the sun went dark was not just a moment in history. It was an awakening, a revelation that the world is fragile, that darkness can fall without warning. For the Norse, this was proof that fate was real, and that the end would come. But it was also a message carved into their culture: survive, endure, and remember. And so the question lingers. When the runes speak of wolves devouring the sun, are they describing a myth that never happened, or are they describing a memory of the sky itself growing black? If so, then perhaps the Vikings were not only storytellers but witnesses, encoding warnings in stone so that we, too, might understand. From the shadowed sky, from these memories of darkness, we turn to the greater vision of doom that shaped their world, the story of Ragnarok itself. Not just an ending, but the final twilight of gods and men. The story of Ragnarok is one of the most haunting visions of apocalypse ever told. It is not a clean ending, not a triumphant conclusion, but a brutal unraveling of everything that exists. The Norse did not imagine their gods as eternal, all-powerful beings who rule forever in comfort. They saw them as warriors, flawed and bound by fate, destined to fight and to fall. To understand why the Vikings carved such tales into their stones and chanted them by their fires, we must step into the myth itself, to witness the twilight of the gods. It begins with whispers of unrest. The great wolf Fenrir, child of Loki and a beast so vast his jaws stretched to the sky, had been bound by the gods in chains forged from impossible things. The sound of a cat's footsteps, the breath of a fish, the beard of a woman. He had been tricked into captivity, and from that moment, the gods knew that one day he would break free. Nearby, Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, circled the world beneath the sea, his body so long he could grasp his own tail. He, too, waited for the day he would rise. And in the halls of the dead, Loki, the trickster, the betrayer, prepared his vengeance against the gods who had cast him out. The signs of the end came first in the natural world. The Fimbulwinter descended. 3 long years without summer, without warmth, a season of ice that swallowed crops and starved nations. Brothers turned against brothers, children against parents, and blood flowed in the snow. It was a vision that felt all too real to a people who had endured real famines, volcanic ash clouds, and endless winters. For the Norse, this was not fantasy, it was a horror of survival, magnified to cosmic scale. Then the bond snapped. Fenrir tore free, his massive paws shaking the earth, his howl echoing across the 9 worlds. Jörmungandr rose from the sea, vomiting poison into the sky, sending waves crashing across the shores. From the south came the fire giants, led by Surtur, his flaming sword blazing brighter than the sun. And from hell itself came Loki, marching with the dead to make war against the living. It is a vision of chaos not as metaphor, but as inevitability. At the heart of this chaos stands Odin, the All-Father, knowing full well that his fate is sealed. He rides into battle on his 8-legged steed, Sleipnir, spear in hand, his one eye burning with the wisdom he had sacrificed so much to gain. He confronts Fenrir, the wolf whose jaws could swallow the world, and though Odin fights bravely, he is devoured. His son Vidar, the silent god of vengeance, avenges him by tearing the wolf apart. But by then the sky itself is aflame. Thor, the thunderer, faces his ancient foe, Jörmungandr, the serpent of the deep. Their battle shakes the earth and the heavens. With his hammer Mjolnir, Thor strikes down the serpent, but its venom floods his body. He takes only 9 steps before he collapses. Dead, one by one, the gods fall. Freya is slain by Surtur, Heimdall and Loki kill each other, and the flames consume the world. The image is stark: oceans boiling, mountains crumbling, the sky torn open. Fire consumes a great tree Drasil, the very axis of existence. Nothing is spared. Not gods, not men, not the world itself. For the Vikings, this was not just a tale of doom. It was a reminder that everything, no matter how mighty, must end. And yet, hidden within this tragedy, there is something else. From the ashes of Ragnarok, a new world rises. Green fields return, rivers flow once more, and two humans, Lif and Lifrisi, emerge from the wood where they have hidden, to begin life anew. Even some of the gods are reborn. Balder, the Shining One, returns from the realm of the dead. The cycle begins again. Destruction gives way to renewal, death to rebirth. Why would a people tell such a story? Why would they cling to such a grim vision of fate? Perhaps because they live with the constant presence of death. The sea claimed sailors, the cold claimed farmers, and war claimed warriors. To them, life was a fragile gift, always one disaster away from ruin. Ragnarok was not only myth, it was an expression of reality. But by framing even the end of the world within a cycle of rebirth, the Norse found a strange kind of hope. Yes, everything will end. Yes, the gods themselves will fall. But from the ashes, life will begin again. Still, there is a deeper question that lingers beneath the poetry. Did the Norse truly believe that the gods themselves would one day die? Or were these tales coded reflections of natural events, the long winters, the eclipses, the volcanic eruptions that threatened to erase entire communities? If so, then Ragnarok is not simply myth but memory, a record of disaster told in the language of gods and monsters. And here lies a mystery. Some rune stones hint at these very things. In their cryptic lines, carved in sharp strokes of fate, they speak of battle beyond comprehension, of suns extinguished, of chaos and renewal. Were these stories carved to remind, to warn, or to prophesy? The twilight of the gods, then, is not just a story about divine beings. It is a story about humanity's greatest fear, that everything we build, everything we believe, everything we are, will one day collapse. The Vikings faced that fear not with denial, but with acceptance, and with a determination to live fiercely while life remained. But among all the rune stones that whisper of doom, one stands apart. A single monument carved over 1,000 years ago, a riddle so complex that scholars are still debating its meaning. Some say it is a memorial, others say it is a prophecy, but all agree it is haunted by the shadow of apocalypse. To understand if the Vikings truly foresaw the end of the world, we must turn to this stone. It is called the Rock Runestone, and it may hold the oldest written apocalypse in Europe. In the quiet countryside of Östergötland, Sweden, stands a massive block of grey stone rising more than 8 feet tall. At first glance, it looks like any other weathered monument from the Viking age, its surface carved with the sharp, angular lines of runes. But the Rock Runestone is unlike any other. Inscribed with more than 700 runes, it contains the longest runic inscription known to us, and perhaps the most mysterious. For centuries, scholars, linguists, and historians have puzzled over its meaning. Was it a simple memorial to a fallen sun, or was it something far more ominous? The stone was carved in the early 9th century, around the year 800 CE, making it older than many of the most famous sagas. Its runes are written in a complex and poetic style, shifting between myth, history, and cryptic riddles. To the people of its time, it must have carried deep significance, but today we are left with fragments, interpretations, and guesses. What makes the Rock Runestone especially fascinating is the possibility that it contains one of the earliest written references to a world-ending catastrophe, perhaps even to Ragnarok itself. The inscription begins in a way that seems almost personal. It tells us that the stone was raised by a man named Varin in memory of his son, Vamid. The loss of a child is a grief that transcends time and culture, and so the rock stone begins as a monument of mourning. But almost immediately, the text shifts into riddles and mythological allusions, as if the grief of one man was tied to the fate of the cosmos. It speaks of battles between ancient heroes, of the theft of the sun, and of cycles of destruction and rebirth. Some scholars believe that Varin, in carving these words, was linking his son's death to a greater cosmic order, a reminder that just as individuals fall, so too do worlds. One of the most haunting sections of the stone refers to the sun itself. It hints at the loss of the sun, or at least its disappearance, as if darkness swallowed the world. To the Vikings, this was not an abstract metaphor. In the centuries before the rock stone was carved, Scandinavia had endured a series of devastating natural events. In the 6th century, a massive volcanic eruption had thrown ash into the atmosphere, dimming the sun for years, causing famine, and killing countless people. Later, harsh winters returned again and again. For those who lived through these disasters, the end of the world was not an idea, it was an experience. It is possible that Varin carved into stone the memory of such events, veiled in mythological language. But the rock runestone does not simply recount disaster. It is structured almost like a riddle contest, with references to mythic episodes hidden within cryptic verses. Some passages mention Theodoric the Great, a historical Gothic king, while others describe mythological beings like Thor and Odin. This blend of history and myth creates a text that is layered, shifting, and difficult to decode. Was Varin drawing a parallel between his son's death and the downfall of great kings? Was he reminding future generations that no one, not even gods or heroes, can escape fate? What unsettles many readers is that beneath its poetic riddles lies a recurring theme: destruction on a cosmic scale. Lines speak of 9 generations and the second time the sun is taken, phrases that suggest cycles of catastrophe repeating over time. The sense is that of a world perpetually moving toward collapse and renewal, echoing the myth of Ragnarok. If this interpretation is correct, then the rock runestone may not just be a personal memorial, but the oldest apocalypse text in Europe, carved into stone centuries before medieval scribes wrote down the sagas. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some scholars argue that the stone is purely about family, lineage, and local heroes, and that its apocalyptic tone is a modern projection. Others insist that the riddles were meant to showcase poetic skill, not to foretell cosmic doom. But even if the stone was not intended as prophecy, its language still resonates with the memory of famine, loss, and survival. For people who lived in the shadow of volcanic winters and unpredictable harvests, apocalypse was not just a story, it was a lived reality. And there is another dimension to the mystery: the runes themselves. Carved into the stone are not only traditional Elder Futhark runes, but also cryptograms, secret codes that require shifting between different rune systems to understand. It is as if Varin wanted to hide his meaning within layers of puzzles, ensuring that only those with special knowledge could fully understand the message. This secrecy raises even more questions. Was the stone meant to preserve sacred knowledge for future generations? Was it a warning, deliberately encrypted so that only the worthy could read it? Standing before the rock runestone today, one cannot help but feel a sense of awe. Its surface is scarred by time, its runes partly worn away, yet it still carries a voice across more than 1,000 years. That voice speaks not only of personal grief, but of a worldview in which death, loss, and apocalypse were inseparably linked. It is a worldview that forces us to confront the fragility of life, the inevitability of endings, and the possibility of renewal. Perhaps this is why the rockstone continues to captivate us. It is not just an artifact, it is a riddle posed by the past, a question carved in stone. What did the Vikings see when they looked toward the end of the world? Were they recalling ancient disasters, prophesying future doom, or simply expressing the pain of a father who lost his son? We may never fully know, but in the unanswered questions lies the power of the stone. The rock runestone stands as both memorial and mystery, a monument to grief and a testament to human imagination. And if within its riddles lies even the faintest echo of Ragnarok, then it is also the first apocalypse written not in ink or parchment, but in stone itself. Imagine living in a world where the sun itself seemed to vanish, where day after day the sky hung low and dim, casting the earth into a twilight that never ended. Crops withered, livestock died, and whole communities starved. This was not myth, nor the imagination of storytellers. It was history. In the 6th century, long before the rock runestone was carved, Scandinavia and much of the northern hemisphere endured one of the most catastrophic natural events in recorded history. In the year 536 CE, a volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland, though some scientists argue for Central America or even Asia, threw unimaginable amounts of ash and sulfur into the upper atmosphere. The sun dimmed, temperatures plummeted, and for nearly 2 years, summer never truly came. Ancient chroniclers across the world recorded their terror. Byzantine historians wrote of sun that gave no light. Irish annals speak of famine so severe that whole families disappeared. In China, records describe strange frosts and failing harvests. And in Scandinavia, the land of the Norse, the effects were devastating. The years that followed became known as the Late Antique Little Ice Age. Crops failed repeatedly, forcing people to slaughter animals they could not feed. Entire villages vanished from the record. Archaeologists have found signs of mass graves, abandoned settlements, and sudden population decline. To the survivors, it must have felt like the very fabric of existence was unraveling. In a world without modern science, how could they understand it? To them, the disappearance of the sun was not geology or climate. It was prophecy, and this is where history bleeds into myth. When later Norse stories describe Fimbulwinter, the great, endless winter that precedes Ragnarok, they may be echoing the memory of this real-world catastrophe. The sagas tell us that before the end of the world, 3 winters will come in succession, without a single summer between them. During that time, snow will blanket the land, brothers will turn on brothers, and humanity will be broken by hunger and strife. For a culture that survived the catastrophe of 536, such stories were not exaggeration. They were lived experience, passed down through generations, retold in fireside tales until they hardened into myth. Even more chilling is that the volcanic disaster was not a singular event. Later eruptions in the 7th century again darkened the skies and poisoned the harvests. By the time of the Viking Age, Scandinavia had endured cycles of sudden, deadly climate shifts. Imagine the psychological toll. Every time the summer failed to arrive, every time storms or frost destroyed crops, people would have wondered, was this the beginning of the end? The connection between natural disaster and apocalypse was not unique to the Norse. Across the ancient world, cultures linked famine and plague to divine punishment. But the Norse expressed it in the starkest possible terms. The world would not end with salvation or rebirth alone, but with fire, blood, and loss. Perhaps this outlook was shaped by centuries of hardship, where survival itself was always uncertain. Archaeologists studying the period after 536 have uncovered evidence of ritual sacrifice in bogs and lakes across northern Europe. Animals, and sometimes humans, were offered up as if to appease the gods or to beg for mercy. Was this desperation a direct response to the dim sun and frozen fields? Were people carving their fear into runes, offering their dead to the water, trying to hold back the end of the world? If so, it suggests that Ragnarok was not simply a story. It was a coping mechanism, a way to give meaning to chaos. This backdrop gives the rock runestone a new dimension. When it speaks of the sun's theft, or of ancient battles fought in darkness, perhaps it was not poetry alone. Perhaps it was memory, an echo of a time when the sun truly did vanish, when children starved, and when survival seemed impossible. To carve those memories in stone was not just to warn the future. It was to say, we endured this once. If it comes again, remember us. There is something profoundly human about this. We, too, live with apocalyptic fears, climate change, pandemics, nuclear war. And just like the Norse, we tell stories, make films, write books, and carve warnings for future generations. In their myths of Ragnarok, the Vikings were doing what we still do today, turning catastrophe into narrative, so that chaos might make sense. But the truly haunting question is this: did they believe these disasters were a cycle? Did they expect the sun to vanish again, the winters to return, the world to burn? If so, then the myths of Ragnarok were not simply tales of the distant future. They were maps of the past, projected forward into eternity. By linking lived catastrophe with prophecy, the Norse created a worldview where disaster was not accidental but inevitable. The volcanic winters of the 6th century may have been the seed, but the myth of Ragnarok was a tree that grew from it, a dark and mighty tree whose branches stretched across generations. And so, when we read the rock runestone, when we hear the sagas of Fimbulwinter, we are not just hearing myth. We are hearing memory. Memory of fire and ash, of famine and frost. Memory of a people who looked at the darkened sky and saw not just weather, but the end of all things. The echoes of catastrophe shaped the very heart of Norse mythology, and it is within those echoes that we begin to understand why Ragnarok mattered so deeply to them, why it was not just an ending, but the ultimate truth about existence. If the rock runestone is a riddle carved in stone, then the poetic Edda is a riddle sung in verse. It is one of the most precious surviving treasures of Norse mythology, preserved not in ancient carvings but in the fragile parchment of a medieval manuscript. Without it, much of what we know about Ragnarok would be lost to time. Yet the Edda itself is not a single coherent text. It is a collection, a patchwork quilt of myth, prophecy, and poetic fragments stitched together by unknown hands. To enter the Poetic Edda is to step into a dreamlike landscape where gods, giants, and humans walk side by side, and where the end of the world is always looming. The Poetic Edda we know today comes from the Codex Regius, a manuscript written in the 13th century, long after the Viking Age had ended. But the poems themselves are far older. Many were composed orally centuries before they were finally written down. For generations, skalds, Norse poets, recited these verses in long halls illuminated by firelight, their words echoing against wooden beams while warriors and chieftains listened in silence. The poems were never meant to be static. They were alive, shifting with each performance, adapting to new audiences and times. What survives in the Edda is but a shadow of that living tradition, yet it still carries an immense power. Among the many poems in the Poetic Edda, none is more haunting or more central to our story than Völuspá, the prophecy of the seers. This poem, placed at the beginning of the collection, sets the tone for everything that follows. It is a revelation, spoken by a mysterious Volva, a seeress who has been summoned by Odin himself. She speaks not only of the creation of the world, but also of its inevitable destruction. From the first lines, the poem brims with mystery and dread. She recalls the birth of gods, the shaping of the earth, and then she turns to darker visions, wolves that devour the sun and moon, winters without end, fire and flood, and finally, the death of gods. The structure of Völuspá is cyclical. It begins with creation, moves toward destruction, and ends with a strange kind of renewal, a new earth rising from the sea, green once again. But this rebirth is not a triumph. It comes only after unimaginable loss. The gods themselves, mighty Odin, brave Thor, cunning Loki, will all fall. It is this duality, the inevitability of destruction and the faint glimmer of rebirth, that gives the poem its terrible beauty. What makes a Poetic Edda so compelling is not just the content of the myths, but the way they are told. The language is stark, symbolic, and enigmatic, filled with kennings, poetic riddles where ship might be called a sea steed or blood a battle sweat of wounds. These layers of meaning create a texture that is both alien and alluring. When the Volva speaks of the sun turning black and the earth sinking into the sea, we are left to wonder, is this literal, metaphorical, or both? For the Norse, myth was never just entertainment. It was a lens through which to understand the harsh realities of existence. And the realities were indeed harsh. Life in Scandinavia was unforgiving, shaped by long winters, dangerous seas, and constant conflict. Against this backdrop, the Edda's prophesies of destruction resonated deeply. To hear Völuspá was to be reminded that no one, not even gods, was safe from fate. It was an acknowledgement of fragility, a recognition that death and loss were woven into the very fabric of life. And yet, the promise of a new world hinted at something beyond despair, endurance. But the Poetic Edda does more than describe Ragnarok. It also preserves countless other myths that weave into the larger tapestry. We learn of Loki's trickery, of Thor's battles with giants, of Odin's relentless quest for wisdom. These stories are not isolated. They feed into the vision of Ragnarok, where every betrayal, every debt, every broken oath comes to fruition. When Loki betrays the gods, when Baldur is slain, when Fenrir grows monstrous, these are not random tales but steps toward the inevitable collapse foretold by the Volva. What is especially intriguing is a possibility that the Eddas prophesied were not just myths but encoded memories of real events. As we saw in the echoes of catastrophe, the Norse had lived through volcanic winters and famine. The imagery of endless cold, of sun and moon devoured, may have sprung from those traumas. The Edda transforms them into cosmic narrative, ensuring that the memory of suffering was never forgotten. In this way, myth and history blur, each reflecting the other. The survival of the Poetic Edda itself is a miracle. For centuries, it lay hidden, unknown, until the 17th century, when the Codex Regius manuscript surfaced. Scholars quickly recognized its importance. Without it, the mythology of the Norse might have been reduced to scattered references in sagas and chronicles. With it, we gained access to a complete vision of their cosmos, from birth to destruction. And within that vision, Ragnarok holds a central place, a warning, a prophecy, and perhaps a memory carved into verse. What is remarkable is how modern the Poetic Edda still feels. Its themes, mortality, destruction, the search for meaning, are timeless. When we read it today, we feel the same chill that Viking audiences must have felt when the Skald recited it centuries ago. It forces us to confront questions that still haunt us. Is destruction inevitable? Can renewal truly erase loss? What does it mean to live knowing that the end is certain? And so, as the firelight flickered in Viking halls, and as warriors listened to the voice of the Volva, they were not just hearing a story. They were hearing their destiny, a destiny carved into the bones of the world itself. The Poetic Edda, then, is more than a manuscript. It is a bridge across time, connecting us to the fears and hopes of people long gone. And at its heart lies a truth the Norse understood all too well, that endings are unavoidable, and that in the shadow of those endings we must still find meaning. At the heart of the Poetic Edda lies a single voice, ancient, haunting, and enigmatic. It is a voice of the Volva, the seers, summoned by Odin himself to reveal truths that even the All-Father cannot know. Her prophecy, preserved in the poem Völuspá, is perhaps the most powerful vision of the end of the world in all mythology. It is not the voice of a triumphant hero, nor the decree of a god, but the whisper of a woman who has seen too much. She speaks from beyond time, from a place where past and future collapse into one. The Volva begins by recounting the earliest moments of existence. She remembers a time before the earth was formed, before the sky arched overhead, when there was nothing but yawning emptiness. From this void came the shaping of the world. The sky raised high, the land formed, the sun and moon set in their courses. Her vision is not one of creation ex nihilo, but of order imposed upon chaos. The gods, she tells us, established the world, measured the heavens, and decreed the cycles of time. It is a fragile balance, one that will not last. From creation, the Volva's prophecy swiftly turns to the present and then the future. She speaks of Yggdrasil, the great world tree, whose roots bind together the 9 realms. But even this mighty tree trembles, beset by serpents gnawing at its roots and stags stripping its bark. The image is clear. The cosmos itself is unstable, threatened from within. For the Norse, the tree was not just a symbol, it was a living map of existence. And if Yggdrasil falters, then all life falters with it. The Volva does not shy away from the deeds of gods and men. She recalls the first war, when the Aesir clashed with the Vani, breaking oaths and staining the world with blood. She recounts the betrayal of Loki, the trickster whose mischief lead to tragedy. And then she reveals the most fateful event of all, the death of Balder, the shining son of Odin. This single loss sets in motion the unraveling of the world. When Balder is slain, innocence itself dies, and with it, the last hope of harmony among gods. But the prophecy does not linger in grief. It presses forward, inexorably, toward doom. The Volva describes wolves who chase the sun and moon across the sky. One day, she warns, those wolves will finally catch their prey. The sun will vanish, swallowed whole, and darkness will fall. Then comes Fimbulwinter, the endless winter, 3 years without summer, when snow blanket the world and human society collapses. Brothers will slay brothers, bonds will break, and war will consume mankind. The images grow more terrifying. The seas will rise, and the Midgard serpent, Jörmungandr, will thrash upon the waves, spewing venom. The wolf Fenrir will break free from his chains, his jaws stretched wide enough to devour the world. Loki will march at the head of giants and the dead, leading them against the gods themselves. The sky will split, the earth will shake, and fire will pour forth from Muspelheim, the realm of flame. At last, the gods will meet their fates, Odin devoured by Fenrir, Thor poisoned by the serpent even as he strikes it down, Loki and Heimdall killing one another in battle. And then, silence. The earth sinks into the sea, flames engulf the sky, and the world we know is no more. Yet the prophecy does not end here. The Volva speaks of something strange, a renewal. From the waters, the earth will rise again, green and fertile. The sun's daughter will shine in her mother's place. Balder, once dead, will return from the underworld. A new hall will stand in the heavens, where righteous souls will dwell in peace. It is not a triumph, not a golden age, but a fragile rebirth after devastation. The world begins again, not cleansed of sorrow but renewed nonetheless. What makes the Volva's prophecy so compelling is its emotional complexity. It is not simply a story of destruction, nor a tale of salvation. It is both. To the Norse, who live in a world of constant hardship, this duality rang true. Life was fragile, loss inevitable, yet cycles of renewal always followed. Winter gave way to spring, famine to feast, and death to new generations. Ragnarok, then, was not just an ending, it was the eternal rhythm of existence, magnified to cosmic scale. The role of the Volva herself adds to the mystery. In Norse society, seeresses held a powerful, if feared, position. They were women who could see beyond the ordinary, speaking truths others did not want to hear. To summon a Volva was to invite unsettling knowledge. Odin, who sacrificed an eye for wisdom, seeks her out not for comfort but for truth. Yet even Odin, the relentless seeker, cannot alter fate. The Volva's words are not suggestions, they are inevitabilities. The gods themselves are bound by the same laws of destiny as mortals. This fatalism is one of the defining features of Norse mythology. Unlike in many other traditions, where gods reign supreme or where the righteous are rewarded with paradise, the Norse believe that even the mightiest must fall. It is not injustice, it is simply the way of things. And in that acceptance lies a strange kind of dignity. To know that death is unavoidable, and still to stand and fight, that was a Norse ideal. Ragnarok, foretold by the Volva, was not a tragedy to be prevented but a destiny to be faced with courage. Even today, the Volva's prophecy resonates. Her vision is both terrifying and oddly comforting. It tells us that destruction will come, yes, but that it will not be the end of everything. Something will survive. The cycle will begin anew. In this way, the prophecy reflects a universal human truth, that we live in the shadow of endings, but endings always carry the seed of beginnings. As we listen to the Volva's voice across the centuries, we are struck not only by visions of fire and frost, but also by the silence that follows. The pause after the world sinks into the sea, the moment before the green earth rises again. It is in that silence that the full weight of her prophecy is felt. The old world must die so the new can be born. And so, the Volva speaks her final words, and Odin listens. The All-Father, who has sought knowledge in every corner of existence, hears what he perhaps already knew, that even he cannot escape the fate woven by the Norns. Neither gods nor men can halt the coming of Ragnarok. All can do is prepare, endure, and remember. The prophecy of the Volva is more than myth. It is a meditation on fate, on loss, and on the resilience of life itself. It is a reminder that even in the face of fire and flood, something endures. Among all the gods of the Norse pantheon, none looms larger than Odin, the All-Father, the Wanderer, the Seeker of wisdom. But Odin is not like the benevolent father figures of other mythologies. He is a god of paradox, ruthless and wise, cunning and desperate, inspiring and terrifying. Above all, he is obsessed with knowledge. To Odin, wisdom is not a luxury, it is survival. And nowhere is this more evident than in his relentless quest to uncover the secrets of fate, even when those secrets point to his own doom. The myths tell us that Odin's hunger for wisdom was insatiable. He roamed the worlds disguised as a grey-cloaked wanderer, seeking out truths hidden from both gods and men. He learned from giants, bargained with seers, and gathered knowledge wherever it could be found. But he did not merely collect facts. Odin wanted to pierce the veil of destiny itself, to understand the shape of the cosmos and the future that lay before it. His pursuit was not gentle. It was brutal, demanding sacrifice after sacrifice. The most famous tale of Odin's sacrifice is his visit to Mimir's well. This well, hidden beneath one of the roots of Yggdrasil, contained the waters of ultimate wisdom. To drink from it was to see with new eyes, to gain understanding of all that had been and all that would be. Odin came to Mimir, the guardian of the well, and begged for a single sip. But Mimir demanded a terrible price, one of Odin's eyes. Without hesitation, Odin plucked out his eye and placed it in the well. He drank, and in that moment he saw further than any being had seen before. But he also saw his own fate, the doom of the gods, the coming of Ragnarok. This paradox defined Odin. He sought knowledge not to avoid fate, but to meet it fully aware. Where others turned away from doom, Odin stared into it. He knew he would fall to Fenrir, the monstrous wolf. He knew his son Baldur's death would herald the end. And yet he continued to lead the gods to prepare for the final battle. To him, wisdom was not a path to escape. It was a strength to face what could not be changed. Odin's sacrifices did not end with his eye. Another story tells of how he hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 nights and 9 days, pierced by his own spear. He did this not for glory, but to gain the secret of the runes. The runes were more than letters. They were symbols of cosmic power, carrying magic, mystery, and fate within their shapes. By suffering on the tree, a symbolic death, Odin gained mastery over them. He emerged not only as a god of wisdom, but as a god of words, spells, and prophecy. Here again, we see Odin's willingness to endure pain for truth. Few gods in mythology sacrifice themselves so completely, and fewer still do it knowing the knowledge gained will confirm their own destruction. In Odin's story lies a grim philosophy. Wisdom is worth any price, even if it brings despair, perhaps especially if it brings despair. For the Norse, who live with a constant threat of loss, famine, and death, Odin's example was not of denial but of courage. But Odin's quest was not only for himself. He sought knowledge to prepare the gods and humanity for Ragnarok. He consulted seers like the Volva. He listened to the whispers of the Norns, the weavers of fate, and he gathered warriors to Valhalla, knowing they would one day be needed in the final battle. Every action he took was in anticipation of the inevitable. His wisdom, his sacrifices, even his deceptions, all of it was aimed at one goal, to arm his people against the end of the world. Yet there's a tragic edge to all of this. For all his sacrifices, for all his cunning, Odin could not alter fate. He could not save Balder. He could not prevent Fenrir's rise. He could not stop Ragnarok. The Norn's weaving was unbreakable, and the knowledge he gained only made him more aware of how powerless even the All-Father truly was. This is what sets Odin apart from other gods and mythologies across the world. He is not omnipotent. He is not immortal in the sense of invulnerability. He is a god who knows he will die, and still fights. There is a profound human resonance in Odin's quest. We, too, seek knowledge even when it brings us painful truths. We study history, knowing it reveals cycles of violence and collapse. We peer into the stars and see the inevitable death of suns. We explore science and discover not immortality, but fragility. Like Odin, we search for meaning even when that meaning leads us to confront our own mortality. His sacrifice is our mirror. The runes themselves, which Odin won through his ordeal, stand as symbols of this tension. They are both tools of power and reminders of fate. To carve a rune was to shape reality, but it was also to acknowledge the pattern woven into the world. Many scholars have argued that the runes are tied not only to magic but to memory, the preservation of knowledge across generations. In this way, Odin's discovery gave humanity a gift, the ability to leave marks, to record, to remember, and in remembering, to endure. Yet for all his gifts, Odin remains an ambiguous figure. He is not purely heroic. He is manipulative, willing to sacrifice others as he sacrificed himself. He wages wars, tricks allies, and bargains with forces darker than himself. Some traditions even depict him as a god of the dead, a figure as grim as he is wise. This complexity only deepens his connection to Ragnarok. For when the final battle comes, Odin's story is not that of a shining savior, but of a flawed leader who knew his destiny and met it head-on. In the end, Odin's quest for knowledge is inseparable from the prophecy of the Volva. He listens to her words not in hope of changing them, but in preparation for fulfilling them. He rides into Ragnarok not blindly, but with full awareness of every horror that awaits. His wisdom does not save him, but it defines him. And so, Odin teaches us a paradoxical lesson, that there is dignity in knowing even when knowing brings despair. That wisdom is not about victory, but about readiness. And that sometimes the greatest courage is not in avoiding death, but in facing it with open eyes. Odin's story is not just myth, it is philosophy carved into legend, a reminder that even in the face of inevitable endings, the pursuit of truth matters. Balder, the shining god, was unlike any other figure in Norse mythology. He was the son of Odin and Frigg, brother to Hr, half-brother to Thor, and beloved by all who dwelled in Asgard. Where Odin embodied wisdom and sacrifice, and Thor embodied strength and thunder, Balder embodied purity, light, and beauty. He was said to be so radiant that light seemed to shine from him. Flowers bloomed in his presence, and even the fiercest warriors softened at the sight of him. If any god represented hope in a world destined for doom, it was Balder, and that is what makes his death so devastating. The myths tell us that Balder began to have terrible dreams. Night after night, visions of his death haunted him. In these dreams, he saw shadows falling over Asgard, the laughter of the god's silence, and fire consuming the world. When Odin and Frigg learned of their son's nightmares, they were horrified. If Balder could die, then surely it meant the prophecy of Ragnarok was nearing. Determined to protect him, Frigg set out on a desperate quest. She traveled across the 9 worlds, extracting oaths from every creature and every object, demanding that they never harm her son. Fire swore it would not burn him. Water swore it would not drown him. Stones, iron, beasts, sickness, all made their vows. And so it seemed that Balder was invulnerable. To celebrate, the gods devised a strange game. They would hurl weapons and objects at him, watching as each bounced harmlessly away. Spears shattered, swords bent, arrows fell useless. The gods laughed, for nothing could harm Balder. He became a living symbol of their hope, proof that perhaps fate could be bent after all. But fate is a cruel weaver, and no vow can undo its thread. For there was one thing that Frigg had overlooked. She did not bother to demand an oath from mistletoe, a small, seemingly harmless plant too young and insignificant to be of concern. She believed it posed no threat. But Loki, the trickster, discovered this oversight, and he saw in it the opportunity to unravel everything. Loki's role in Balder's death is one of the most chilling parts of the myth. He approached Hr, Balder's blind twin brother, who sat apart while the other gods played their game. Loki, with false kindness, placed a sprig of mistletoe into Hr's hand and guided him. "Why do you not join in the sport?" he asked. "Hey, I will help you." Hr, blind and unaware, hurled the mistletoe at Balder. The plant, harmless in all other contexts, pierced Balder like a spear. The shining god fell dead. Silence consumed Asgard. What moments before had been laughter turned instantly to horror. The gods stood frozen, unable to believe what had happened. Odin felt the prophecy unfolding before his very eyes, and Frigg's cries of despair echoed through the halls of the gods. Balder, the hope of Asgard, the god who symbolized light, was gone. The death of Balder is more than a tragic story. It marks a point of no return for the Norse cosmos. From this moment, Ragnarok is inevitable. The world has been wounded, and no healing is possible. Balder's descent into hell, the realm of the dead, sets into motion the chain of events that will one day destroy the gods themselves. The myths tell us that even in death, the gods sought to save him. Herma, another of Odin's sons, rode Sleipnir, the great 8-legged horse, down into the underworld to bargain with Hel, the goddess of death. She agreed to release Balder on one condition, that every creature and every being in existence must weep for him. The gods spread across the worlds, demanding tears. And everywhere they went, beings mourned. Stones wept, trees wept, even metal wept. All creation grieved for Balder. But then they came upon a giantess named Keke, often thought to be Loki in disguise. She refused to weep. Her heart was cold, and her words were cruel. Let Hel keep what she has. Because of that one refusal, Balder remained in the land of the dead, and hope died with him. The symbolism here is haunting. The shining god could not be saved, not because the universe did not care, but because of a single act of spite, a refusal to show compassion. In this, the myth suggests that the unraveling of the world is not brought about by great armies or monsters alone, but by small acts of cruelty, by indifference in the face of tragedy. Balder's funeral was a spectacle of grief. His body was placed on his great ship, Hringhorni, which was said to be the largest vessel ever built. But when the gods tried to push it to sea, they could not move it. They called upon a giantess of immense strength, Hyrkin, who rode in on a wolf with snakes for reins. She pushed the ship so hard it nearly tore apart. Upon that vessel, Balder's body was laid, surrounded by treasures, weapons, and his horse. His wife, Nanna, was so stricken with grief that she died on the spot, and her body was placed beside his. Flames consumed the ship, and smoke carried Balder into the realm of death. This funeral marks a shift in the myths. No longer is the story of the gods one of triumph or even stability. The shadow of Ragnarok lengthens. Odin, watching the flames, must have known that the death of his son sealed their fate. Even the Norns, who wove the threads of destiny, would not unravel this knot. Yet, Baldur's death is not without a glimmer of hope. The myths say that after Ragnarok, when the world is destroyed and remade, Baldur will return from the underworld to rule in peace. His resurrection symbolizes renewal after destruction, light after darkness. For the Norse, who lived in a brutal and uncertain world, this promise of rebirth offered a fragile kind of comfort. Still, the emotional weight of Baldur's death lingers. It is a reminder that even the most beautiful, the most beloved, are not spared from fate. In fact, their loss often strikes the hardest. His story embodies a cruelty of destiny in Norse myth, that no matter how much you love, no matter how much you prepare, the end cannot be stopped. The death of Baldur is a breaking point. It transforms a myth from stories of gods and heroes into a countdown to catastrophe. And it is Loki, the god of mischief, who ensures that countdown begins. His role in this tragedy will have consequences far beyond one death, for it cements his place as a great betrayer, the architect of Ragnarok itself. And so, the question arises, why did Loki do it? Why betray the gods who had once called him kin? Why destroy the light of his god? To answer that, we must look deeper into Loki's nature, not just as a trickster, but as a god of chaos itself. Loki is perhaps the most enigmatic figure in Norse mythology. Neither holy god nor holy giant, neither fully ally nor outright enemy. He is a shapeshifter in every sense, physically, morally, and spiritually. To some, he is a companion of Odin and Thor, helping them in their adventures with wit and cunning. To others, he is the ultimate betrayer, the architect of Baldur's death, and the harbinger of Ragnarok. Loki's dual nature, both indispensable and dangerous, makes him one of the most compelling figures in myth, a character who defies easy categorization. At first glance, Loki appears as a figure of mischief rather than malice. Many tales portray him as a problem solver of the gods, though often the problems were of his own making. He once cut off the hair of Sif, Thor's wife, as a cruel prank. When Thor threatened to break his bones, Loki scrambled to repair the damage. He sought out the dwarves, master craftsmen, and through his clever manipulation secured gifts not only for Sif but for all the gods, Odin's spear Gungnir, Thor's hammer Mjolnir, and Freyr's ship Skidbladnir. In this story, Loki is a catalyst of chaos, but also the one who restores balance. He creates disaster, then redeems himself through ingenuity. This pattern repeats throughout many myths. Loki tricks, deceives, and schemes, but somehow his actions often lead to the gods acquiring treasures or triumphs they could not have gained otherwise. It is as though chaos itself is necessary to progress, and Loki, embodying chaos, fulfills that role. Without his disruptions, the gods would stagnate. With him, they are forced to adapt, to sharpen themselves against his schemes. He is both poison and medicine, but beneath the laughter and cleverness lies something darker. Loki's mischief is not harmless. His tricks reveal the vulnerabilities of the gods, exposing their weaknesses and hubris. When he engineers Baldur's death, it is no longer a joke that can be undone with clever bargaining or compensation. It is a wound to the cosmos itself. This marks a turning point where Loki transforms from a troublesome companion to an existential threat. Why does Loki betray the gods so profoundly? Some scholars suggest it is because Loki, as a figure, represents entropy, destruction as a necessary counterpart creation. Just as fire warms but also burns, Loki brings both gifts and ruin. His nature cannot be fixed to one side. Others argue his betrayal comes from resentment. Though he often stood at Odin's side, Loki was never fully accepted as one of the Aesir. He was the outsider, the blood brother who would never truly belong. Perhaps, in orchestrating Baldur's death, he exacted revenge on those who laughed at him, used him, and distrusted him. The myths give us glimpses of Loki's bitterness. In the tale of the Lokasenna, a poem preserved in the Poetic Edda, Loki storms into a feast of the gods and unleashes venom upon them all. He mocks Odin for cowardice, insults Thor for his bluster, and accuses the goddesses of unfaithfulness. His words drip with scorn, not the playful jest of a trickster, but the sharp edge of resentment. Here, Loki sheds a mask of mischief and reveals the anger beneath. He is not content to be the clown of his god, he will become its destroyer. Yet, to reduce Loki simply to a villain misses the complexity of his role. Without Loki, the gods would not have their greatest weapons. Without him, Asgard would not have been tested or challenged. He is a shadow to their light, the necessary chaos to their order. His betrayal is terrible, but perhaps inevitable. The myth suggests that the cosmos itself requires this balance. Too much order leads to stagnation. Too much chaos leads to collapse. Loki embodies a tipping point between the two. There is also the question of fate. Did Loki choose to betray the gods, or was he always destined to? The prophecy of Ragnarok names him as a leader of the forces of destruction, father to the monsters who will bring the world to ruin. Fenrir the wolf, Jörmungandr the serpent, and Hel, the queen of the underworld. Could he ever have been anything else? Or was his very existence shaped by the threads of fate, ensuring that his mischief would one day turn into malice? This ambiguity makes Loki a mirror for us. He embodies the contradictions of human nature, our capacity for brilliance and cruelty, for creation and destruction. He is a clever friend who suddenly turns into the enemy, the laughter that hides a knife. Perhaps this is why he fascinates us even today. We recognize something of ourselves in him, the part that resists rules, that resents exclusion, that seeks to disrupt even at great cost. After Baldur's death, Loki's position among the gods collapses. The laughter is gone, the tolerance for his mischief extinguished. His betrayal is unforgivable, and the gods will hunt him down. His fall from trickster to traitor is complete, and the story shifts from his clever antics to his punishment. Yet, even in chains, Loki remains dangerous, his spirit unbroken, waiting for the day when his bonds will snap and Ragnarok will begin. In this way, Loki is both the spark and the storm. He sets events into motion, and then he becomes the leader of the chaos he embodies. The gods may loathe him, but they cannot erase him. He is the necessary shadow cast by their light. The story of Loki is not just about betrayal. It is about the role of chaos in the fabric of existence. We may fear it, we may despise it, but we cannot live without it. Order without chaos is brittle. Chaos without order is destructive. Together, they create the balance of the world. And in that balance, Loki plays his part, whether friend or foe. The death of Baldur has made Loki the enemy of the gods. But the consequences of his betrayal do not end with grief. They lead to his capture, his punishment, and ultimately his role in the final destruction. And so the story moves forward. The gods, enraged and mourning, will hunt down Loki. His time as the mischievous companion is over. His punishment will be as brutal as his betrayal. After Baldur's death, the bonds of fellowship between Loki and the gods of Asgard shatter forever. What had once been tolerated as mischief, even when it brought humiliation or inconvenience, could no longer be forgiven. Loki was no longer the trickster who caused trouble and then fixed it. He was a betrayer who had struck at the heart of Asgard, the architect of despair. His role in Baldur's murder demanded vengeance, and the gods resolved to hunt him down and make him suffer for eternity. The myths tell us that Loki fled Asgard in disguise. He changed his form again and again, slipping between shapes like smoke. Some say he turned into a salmon, darting into rivers and hiding beneath rocks. Others say he took on the form of an old woman, cloaked and bent, to elude the searching eyes of the Aesir. But the gods were relentless. They scoured the worlds for him, their rage fueling their pursuit. Eventually, they cornered him near a waterfall, where he had hidden as a fish among the rapids. Thor himself cast a net into the water and dragged Loki from his refuge. Dragged before the gods, Loki was no longer met with laughter. No jest or clever excuse could undo what he had done. The assembly passed judgment. Loki would suffer not a swift death, but a punishment designed to last until the very end of the world. The god seized Loki's sons, Vali and Nafi, and twisted their fate into his torment. They transformed Vali into a wolf, and in a frenzy, he tore apart his brother Nafi. With Nafi's entrails, the gods bound Loki to 3 great stones, one beneath his shoulders, one beneath his loins, and one beneath his knees. The gruesome cord hardened into iron, chains that no power could break. But the cruelty of his punishment did not end there. Above Loki's head, the gods placed a venomous serpent, whose fangs dripped burning poison. Drop by drop, the venom fell upon his face, searing his skin and sending waves of agony through his body. His scream shook the caverns where he was imprisoned, echoing like thunder through the earth. And yet, even in this torment, a sliver of compassion remained. Loki's faithful wife, Sigyn, stood by him. She held a bowl above his face, catching the venom before it struck. For a time, her devotion gave him respite. But when the bowl filled, she had to step away to empty it. In those moments, the venom fell freely, and Loki writhed in unbearable pain. His shriek said to be the cause of earthquakes across the world. This punishment is more than vengeance. It is symbolism. Loki, the trickster who could not be contained, who shifted shapes and slipped through every net, was now immobilized, bound in darkness. The one who unleashed chaos upon Asgard now endured endless torment at the hands of order. His chains represented the fragile attempt of the gods to hold chaos at bay, to delay the inevitable tide of Ragnarok. But fate cannot be chained forever. The myths make clear that these bonds, like all bonds in Norse mythology, are temporary. One day, at the hour of Ragnarok, Loki's bindings will shatter, and he will rise again, not as a jester of the gods, but as their enemy. His suffering is not an end but a waiting. Every drop of venom, every cry of pain, is a countdown to the moment he will lead the armies of destruction against those who condemned him. The image of Sigyn at Loki's side adds another layer of complexity. Her loyalty, even to a condemned traitor, reminds us that no figure is purely one thing. Even the god's greatest enemy had someone who loved him enough to share his torment. In a mythology filled with betrayal and vengeance, Sigyn's devotion stands out as a quiet act of resistance. She does not undo Loki's punishment, but she lessens it, refusing to abandon him completely. In her, the myth suggests that compassion exists even in the darkest places. The tale of Loki's punishment also reflects the Norse view of justice. Unlike in some mythologies, where divine punishment is often swift and final, here it is lingering, brutal, and inexorable. The gods did not kill Loki. They ensured his suffering would stretch across ages, a constant reminder of his betrayal. Justice in this world is not about closure. It is about containment, about holding back the forces of chaos for as long as possible. There is also a deep psychological resonance in Loki's binding. The venom dripping onto his face is an image of torment that never ends, suffering that comes not in a single overwhelming blow but in endless, small agonies. Many have interpreted this as a metaphor for the slow, grinding pains of life, the inescapable burdens that wear us down drop by drop. It is not the sudden storm that breaks us, but the constant drip of hardship. Yet Loki endures. His pain does not destroy him. It transforms him. When he breaks free at Ragnarok, he will not emerge weakened but filled with fury. His torment fuels a fire of vengeance that will drive him to lead the armies of chaos against the gods. In this way, the gods' punishment is both their justice and their undoing. By chaining Loki, they ensure his hatred burns hotter. By tormenting him, they give him a reason to rise again. The binding of Loki also echoes the earlier binding of Fenrir, his monstrous wolf son. Just as Fenrir was chained with a magical cord forged from impossible ingredients, Loki too is bound with entrails turned to iron. Both father and son are imprisoned, waiting for the day when their bonds will snap. The parallel is chilling. The gods may chain their enemies, but they cannot escape the fate those enemies embody. When the world ends, it will not be in spite of their chains, but because of them. For the audience of these myths, the Norse people, Loki's punishment must have carried a grim resonance. In their world, suffering was inescapable. Life was filled with hunger, cold, war, and loss. Like Loki, they endured pain that seemed endless, pain that no divine figure would erase. Yet, just as Loki would one day break free, perhaps they, too, found a strange hope in the idea that suffering was not forever, that one day all bonds would break, and the world itself will be remade. And so Loki lies bound, writhing in darkness, venom burning his skin, his wife by his side. His screams shake the earth, his hatred festers, and his moment of release draws closer with every drip. The gods may believe they have silenced him, but in truth, they have only delayed his vengeance. This moment, the punishment of Loki, marks the tightening of fate's noose around the gods. They have chained chaos, but in doing so, they have also sealed their own destiny. For when the bindings break, Loki will not rise alone. He will rise with his monstrous children, with the dead themselves, and with an army vast enough to swallow Asgard whole. Long before Loki's chains would snap and the skies would split, whispers of doom traveled through the 9 worlds. These whispers came from the Volvas, seers whose voices carried the weight of fate. In Norse tradition, the Volvas were feared and revered. They spoke not with the certainty of choice, but with the inevitability of destiny. When they opened their mouths, the future poured out like smoke, twisting and curling but never dissipating. Their prophecies gave shape to the terror that lived in the hearts of gods and men alike. The end was not only coming, it had already been woven. The most famous of these visions is preserved in the Völuspá, the prophecy of the seers, a haunting poem from the Poetic Edda. In it, a Volva summoned by Odin recounts the creation of the world, its flourishing, and its ultimate collapse. She tells of Yggdrasil trembling, of the bonds breaking, of monsters rising from the deep. Her word fall like thunder on the ears of the Allfather. I see the earth rise again from the waters, green once more. I see the halls of the gods fall in fire. I see brothers slay brothers, and fathers their sons. I see the wolf devour the son. For the Norse, this was not allegory. This was certainty. The world was destined for destruction, and the gods themselves would not escape it. Every triumph, every feast, every laugh in the golden halls of Asgard was tinged with the shadow of the Volva's prophecy. The Norns, too, played their part in shaping this vision. These three mysterious beings, Urd, what has been, Verdandi, what is becoming, and Skuld, what shall be, sat at the base of Yggdrasil, tending its roots and weaving the threads of fate. Every life, every choice, every end was a thread in their tapestry. Not even Odin could alter their weaving. He might see it, he might prepare for it, but he could not cut or tie what they had already spun. This idea of inescapable fate is one of the most haunting elements of Norse mythology. Unlike in Greek stories, where fate could sometimes be tricked or bargained with, the Norse view was absolute. Even the gods, with all their power, were bound to the same destiny as mortals. They could not escape. The seers did not merely predict. They revealed the structure of the cosmos itself. The prophesies spoke of signs that would herald the coming of Ragnarok. The sun and moon, chased across the sky by wolves, would finally be devoured. The winters would grow long and bitter, with no summer in between, a Fimbul winter, 3 endless winters of hunger and war. Brothers would turn on brothers, kin against kin, until blood soaked the earth. The world tree would shudder, shaking the heavens and the underworld alike. And when the bonds of Loki and Fenrir broke, when the serpent Jörmungandr rose from the seas, the final battle would begin. For the people who told and retold these stories, these prophecies were not distant fantasy. They were woven into their worldview, shaping how they lived. The Norse did not believe in eternal salvation, in paradise without end. Their myths told them that everything, gods, men, mountains, oceans, was temporary. Even beauty, even joy, even power was fleeting. The seers reminded them of this truth with every whispered prophecy. But far from breeding despair, this knowledge forged resilience. If even the gods would fall, then what mattered was not avoiding death, but meeting it with courage. We can imagine the tension in Odin's heart as he listened to these prophecies. He had sacrificed his eye to drink from Mimir's well, had hung from Yggdrasil to gain the runes, had sought every fragment of wisdom across the world, all to know what was coming. And what he knew was this: Ragnarok could not be prevented. His sons would die. He would fall to the wolf. Asgard would burn. Yet still he gathered warriors to Valhalla. Still he sought knowledge. Still he prepared. The whispers of doom were not a call to surrender, but a call to readiness. One haunting detail from the Völuspá is its ending. After fire and flood, after the destruction of gods and giants, the seers tells of renewal. A new world will rise, green and fertile. Balder, the slain son of Odin, will return from hell. Survivors among the gods and humans will gather, and a new age of peace will dawn. The prophecy offers not only death but rebirth. It reminds us that endings are not absolute. They are part of a cycle. For the Norse, this vision must have carried a bittersweet comfort. Yes, the end was inevitable. Yes, even the mightiest would fall. But from that destruction, something new would emerge. Their worldview embraced both despair and hope, annihilation and renewal. It was not a promise of personal immortality, but of cosmic rebirth. The seers, with their chants and visions, shaped how the Norse understood their place in the world. They were not masters of their destiny, but participants in a vast, unbreakable pattern. Their task was not to change fate, but to live within it with courage, to carve meaning from inevitability. And so, their whispers linger in the background of every myth. When Odin raises his spear, when Thor battles giants, when Loki rides in chains, the voices of the Volvas echo. It is coming. It cannot be stopped. But prophecy does more than foretell. it shapes action. Knowing the end is coming forces choices. Do you despair? Do you fight? Do you embrace the fleeting joys while you can? The gods chose to prepare for war, to gather strength, to meet the final day with defiance. The Norse people, hearing these stories, were invited to do the same. And with these prophecies in place, the stage is set. Ragnarok is no longer a vague shadow. It is a countdown. The seers have spoken, the Norns have woven, and destiny has locked the gods in its grip. Next comes the question of the world itself, the cosmos that will one day be torn apart. To understand what is at stake, we must step back and look at the structure of existence, the 9 worlds held together by Yggdrasil, the great ash tree that trembles as fate draws near. At the heart of Norse cosmology stood Yggdrasil, the immense world tree, its branches stretching into the heavens and its roots sinking deep into realms of ice, fire, and shadow. This ash tree was no mere symbol. It was the spine of existence, the axis upon which all creation turned. The 9 worlds were bound together by its trunk, nourished by its roots, and sheltered beneath its boughs. To speak of Ragnarok was to speak of the shattering of this cosmic order, for when Yggdrasil trembled, everything trembled. The 9 worlds, each distinct yet interwoven, made up the Norse universe. At the top stood Asgard, the shining realm of the Aesir gods, where Odin ruled from his high seat and Thor's hammer thundered against the foes of order. Nearby lay Vanaheim, the land of the Vani gods, masters of fertility and prosperity, whose uneasy truce with the Aesir brought both conflict and wisdom. Below, stretching far and wide, was Midgard, the world of humanity, encircled by the serpent Jörmungandr, who lay coiled in the sea, waiting to stir. To the east lay Jotunheim, the land of the giants, beings of raw chaos and primal power who were both enemies and reluctant allies to the gods. Southward burned Muspelheim, realm of fire, home to Surt and his flaming sword, the very spark that would ignite the world's final destruction. Opposite it in balance lay Niflheim, the land of ice and mist, a frozen wasteland from which rivers of creation once flowed, and where the dragon Nidhogg gnawed eternally at Yggdrasil's roots. Beneath the tree's shade was Alfheim, the luminous home of the light elves, who embodied beauty and creativity, contrasted by Svartalfheim or Nidavella, the shadowed realm of the dwarfs, mastersmiths whose forges birthed treasures like Thor's hammer and Odin's spear. Finally, there was Helheim, the realm of the dead, ruled by Hel, Loki's daughter, where those who died not in glory but in sickness, age, audition had dwelled in her cold halls. Together these 9 worlds formed a fragile balance. Each was different in nature, some radiant, some desolate, some brimming with conflict, but all were connected by Yggdrasil's lifeblood. The great tree was not simply a bridge, but the foundation of existence itself. And yet, Yggdrasil was not untroubled. Its roots and branches were constantly under attack. A stag nibbled at its leaves. A squirrel named Ratito scurried up and down its trunk, carrying insult between the eagle and its branches and the dragon Nidhogg below, while serpents gnawed at its roots. Even before Ragnarok, the tree carried the scars of struggle, holding the universe together through endurance, not perfection. For the Norse people, this vision of the cosmos was both vast and intimate. Their lives in Midgard were linked to the struggles of gods in Asgard and the schemes of giants in Jotunheim. Every storm, every eruption, every harvest was not merely a natural event but an echo of cosmic forces rippling through Yggdrasil's branches. To them, existence was not static, it was precarious, constantly under threat, and ultimately doomed to collapse. This understanding of the 9 worlds deepened the terror of Ragnarok. It was not just the death of gods or the fall of Asgard. It was the unraveling of the entire cosmos. When the prophecy spoke of Yggdrasil shuddering, it meant every realm, from the highest heavens to the coldest depths, would feel the quake. Midgard seas would rise as Jörmungandr thrashed, Muspelheim's flames would roar across the sky, and Niflheim's frost would crack the bones of the earth. Helheim's gates would burst open, unleashing legions of the dead to march under Loki's command. The collapse of the 9 worlds was nothing less than the death of reality itself. Yet within this fragility, there was also a strange resilience. The Norse myths remind us that Yggdrasil, though wounded and tormented, endured. It withstood the gnawing of Nidhogg, the bites of serpents, the weight of insults carried by Ratatosk. The cosmos did not rest on a pristine, unbreakable foundation, but on a living, suffering tree that bent and bled yet still held. Perhaps this was the greatest truth of all. Existence was never secure, but it endured long enough for stories to be told, battles to be fought, and lives to be lived. The 9 worlds also represented the interconnectedness of fate. No realm could fall without shaking the others. A victory in Asgard might mean a disaster in Jotunheim. A birth in Midgard might echo in Vanaheim. When Ragnarok came, the collapse would not be isolated. It would be total, spreading like cracks through glass until nothing remained unbroken. It is here that the poignancy of the Norse worldview reveals itself. They envisioned a cosmos beautiful but impermanent, vast but vulnerable. The 9 worlds were not eternal heavens or hells beyond reach. They were fragile realms suspended on a living tree, destined one day to tremble, split, and fall. And still, life was lived fully within them. Songs sung in Alfheim, weapons forged in Nidavellir, feasts held in Asgard. The awareness of impermanence did not erase joy, it sharpened it. For the gods, the 9 worlds were their charge, their responsibility. Odin's endless pursuit of knowledge, Thor's ceaseless battles, Freyr's gifts of fertility, all were acts of preservation, buying time against the inevitable. They knew the tree was wounded, the bonds were weakening, the end was foretold. Yet still they guarded Yggdrasil's branches, still they tended to its balance, still they fought to hold the 9 worlds together for as long as possible. When the seers whispered of Yggdrasil trembling, it was not a vague omen. It was a direct promise. The very foundation of reality would convulse, and the 9 worlds would unravel like threads pulled from a tapestry. The question was not if, but when. And when that moment came, no god, no realm, no creature would remain untouched. This is why the 9 worlds mattered so deeply in the story of Ragnarok. They gave scale to the prophecy. The end was not the fall of a city or the death of a people. It was the breaking of everything, the death of the tree that held the sky aloft and the soil below. And yet, just as with the seers' vision, there was a faintest whisper of renewal. When Yggdrasil trembled and broke, from its ashes a new world would rise, green and reborn. But before renewal could come, destruction had to sweep across the 9 worlds. And at the heart of that destruction would be the most cunning, restless, and unpredictable of figures, Loki, the trickster whose chains would not hold. His role in Ragnarok was both inevitable and devastating, for it was he who would turn prophecy into reality. If Odin was the all-seeing father, Thor the unyielding warrior, and Freyr the nurture of life, then Loki was a shadow between them all, the trickster, the whisperer, the one who never belonged fully in any realm. To understand Ragnarok, one cannot ignore Loki, for his story is not simply that of mischief and chaos. It is a story of betrayal, vengeance, and the unleashing of forces so terrible that even the gods could not control them. Loki's origins are slippery, as befits his nature. Born of giants yet counted among the Aesir, he walked a line between 2 worlds, one of order, the other of primal chaos. He was handsome, clever, and sharp-tongued, able to charm his way into feasts and councils, yet he was also a shapeshifter, a schemer, and above all, a being whose loyalty was never certain. To the gods, he was useful, a companion to Odin, a helper in desperate times, a source of cunning solutions when brute force failed. But with every favor he granted, there was a sting, a price, or a twist that left the gods uneasy. The myths recount how Loki aided the god by tricking builders, outwitting enemies, and even birthing Odin's mighty horse Sleipnir in one of his strangest exploits. Yet alongside these tales of service are darker stories of treachery, insult, and cruelty. His tongue was a weapon, cutting God to the bone with sharp words. His laughter often masked resentment. And in his children, Loki's true legacy took shape, for he fathered beings who embodied the very forces destined to bring down the 9 worlds. From his union with the giantess Angroda came 3 monstrous offspring, the wolf Fenrir, whose jaws would one day devour Odin himself, the serpent Jörmungandr, so vast it encircled Midgard and lay coiled in the seas, and Hel, the cold queen of the underworld, who received the dish in the dead. The gods, alarmed at these births, sought to contain them. Hel was banished to rule in the realm of the dead. Jörmungandr was hurled into the ocean's depths. And Fenrir, though raised in Asgard, grew so large and fierce that only the god Tyr dared feed him. When the gods attempted to bind the wolf with chains, Fenrir shattered them with ease. Finally, they tricked him into wearing a magical fetter forged by a dwarf from impossible ingredients. Cat's footsteps, a woman's beard, a fish's breath. Fenrir, sensing betrayal, demanded a pledge of good faith, and Tyr placed his hand in the wolf's mouth. When Fenrir realized the trap, he bit down, severing Tyr's hand. From then on, hatred festered in Fenrir's heart, and vengeance simmered in Loki's blood. The gods' treatment of Loki's children was not merely precaution, it was humiliation. To Loki, it was a declaration that he and his bloodline would never be trusted, never be accepted. And when at last the balance broke, when his final act of treachery arrived, it would not come without reason. That moment came with the death of Balder, the shining god of light and purity, beloved of all creation. Balder had been plagued with dreams of his own death, and Odin, fearing the prophecy, sought to protect him. His mother, Frigg, extracted promises from every object in the world not to harm Balder. Stones, metals, plants, animals, all swore oaths. But one small plant, the mistletoe, was overlooked, thought too harmless to matter. Loki discovered this omission. With cold cunning, he fashioned a spear of mistletoe and tricked Balder's blind brother Aechir into throwing it during a game. The spear pierced Balder, and the god of light fell lifeless. The grief of the gods was immeasurable. Balder was not only beloved but seen as a symbol of hope, a promise that even in a world destined for doom, light could endure. With his death, that promise dimmed. The gods sought to retrieve him from Hel's realm, but Hel demanded that all things weep for him. And so they did. All creatures, stones, trees, and rivers shed tears, except for one, a giantess, who refused to cry. Many believed this was Loki in disguise. Thus Balder remained in Hel's cold halls, and the gods' despair turned to rage. When Loki mocked their grief, when he ridiculed them with venomous words in the infamous Lokasena feast, he crossed a final threshold. No longer a companion or tolerated trickster, he became their enemy. The gods bound him in chains deep beneath the earth, placing a serpent above his face to drip venom into his eyes. His wife, Sigyn, stayed by his side, catching the poison in a bowl, but when she emptied it, the venom struck Loki's face, and his writhing caused earthquakes to shudder through Midgard. Bound, humiliated, and tormented, Loki waited. The prophesied said he would not remain chained forever. When the signs of Ragnarok appeared, Fimbulwinter, the breaking of bonds, the shuddering of Yggdrasil, Loki would be freed. He would sail at the head of Naglfar, a ship made from the nails of the dead, carrying giants, monsters, and the descendant from Hel's realm to wage war upon the gods. At his side would march his children, Fenrir breaking free of his fetter, Jörmungandr rising from the sea, Hel unleashing her legions. It was not merely vengeance, it was annihilation. Loki's role in Ragnarok is more than that of villain. He is the embodiment of chaos, the reminder that even within the divine order, betrayal festers, cracks spread, and the seeds of destruction grow. His mischief may have amused once, but his final acts revealed what had always been true. Loki was not a servant of order but of its undoing. And yet, there is something tragically human in him. Loki is the outcast, the clever one who never belonged, the father whose children were taken and caged, the companion turned scapegoat. His rebellion was born not only of malice but of pain. And in his rage, he ensured that the gods who scorned him would pay with their very lives. When the fire of Muspelheim spread, when Fenrir's jaws opened wide, when Jörmungandr's coils churned the seas, Loki would be there at the center, smiling, mocking, and leading the charge. Without him, Ragnarok might never come. With him, it was unstoppable. But Loki was not the only force destined to rise in the twilight of the gods. In the fiery south, a power older and more destructive than even the trickster waited, the fire giant Surt, whose flaming sword would cut the world to ash. Long before gods and men walked the 9 worlds, before Yggdrasil stretched its branches across creation, there was fire. To the Norse, fire was not only warmth and light but also danger, hunger, and unquenchable destruction. And in the far southern realm of Muspelheim, fire had a guardian, a master, a figure who waited with patient inevitability. His name was Surt, and when he finally stepped forth, his flames would reduce the cosmos to ash. Surt was not like the frost giants of Jotunheim or the sea serpents of Midgard. He was older, more primordial, his existence tied to the first sparks of creation. In the beginning, when the yawning void of Ginnungagap stretched between fire and ice, it was Muspelheim's heat that met Niflheim's cold, birthing the first giant Ymir and the cow-awed Humla who nourished him. Fire, then was both a creator and a destroyer. Without it, life would never have emerged. But within it was always a promise of consumption, the certainty that what it created, it would one day burn away. The sagas describe Surt as a towering figure, his skin blackened like charred wood, his eyes burning with the light of coals, and in his hand a sword that blazed brighter than the sun. This was no ordinary weapon. The Eddas tell us that when Ragnarok came, Surt's sword would cut the sky itself, setting all 9 worlds aflame. He was not a schemer like Loki, nor a beast of hunger like Fenrir. Surt was inevitability, the final stage of fire, the blaze that no rain could quench, no god could withstand. Unlike the easier gods, Surt remained apart. He did not take part in their feasts, nor did he interfere in their struggles, at least not until the end. He was a guardian, standing watch at the border of Muspelheim, his flames keeping intruders at bay. And yet, the prophecy said that when the bonds of the world broke, when the warning signs of Ragnarok rippled through Yggdrasil, Surt would leave his post. He would lead the sons of Muspelheim, the fire giants, across Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge. And under their feet, the bridge would shatter, unable to bear their heat, cutting off a link between Asgard and Midgard. From that moment on, there would be no retain, no retreat, only the march of flame. The image of Surt is terrifying not only for his power but for what he represents. The gods could fight giants, bind wolves, and trick serpents. But how does one fight fire itself? It devours without conscience, consumes without pause. To stand against Surt was to stand against the very nature of destruction. And unlike the trickster Loki, whose motives were tangled with betrayal and grief, Surt had no emotion in his mission. He was not driven by vengeance, nor ambition, nor deceit. He burned because it was his nature to burn. There is a haunting parallel here to the volcanic eruptions and wildfires that shaped the Norse world. Iceland eruptions, visible even from distant lands, sent rivers of flame and ash across the landscape. Villages were buried, skies darkened, and seas turned red with molten rock. The people of the North understood that fire was unstoppable. It did not negotiate. It did not show mercy. In their mythology, they gave this terror a face and a sword. Surt, the fire that consumes all. What makes Surt's role in Ragnarok even more striking is its finality. Loki unleashes chaos, Fenrir swallows Odin, Jörmungandr poisons Thor. But Surt ends the story. After the gods and giants fall in battle, after the wolf and serpent are slain, it is Surt who raises his sword and sweeps flame across the world. Mountains crumble, seas boil, the very sky ignites. Yggdrasil, the world tree, shudders and burns. The 9 worlds collapse into smoke and sparks. There is no victory in this. No one survives his fire. Not god, not giant, not mortal. All is consumed. And yet, from this absolute devastation, the myths whisper rebirth. The flames do not end existence. They cleanse it. After the inferno, a new earth rises from the waters, green and fertile, with fields that grow without sowing, with a sun brighter than before. In this vision, Surt's destruction is not merely wrath. It is transformation. The old world, scarred by betrayal and bound to doom, must be burned away for something purer to emerge. It is easy to see how this resonated with the Norse worldview. Their lives were harsh, marked by long winters, sudden storms, and violent raids. Destruction was never far away. But just as spring followed winter, and green shoots followed fire-cleared fields, renewal followed catastrophe. Surt was terrifying, yes, but he was also necessary. Without his fire, the cycle could not complete. Without his sword, the new world could never dawn. For the gods, however, this was no comfort. They knew Surt's arrival meant their doom. Odin could prepare armies. Thor could swing his hammer. Tyr could sacrifice his hand. But none of them could stop the fire. The seers of the Veluspa made it clear. When Surt lifted his sword, even the mightiest gods would fall. And so, every feast in Asgard, every hunt, every battle was lived in the shadow of his flames. The role of Surt also gives Ragnarok a scale unmatched by other myths. It is not merely the clash of gods and monsters. It is cosmic annihilation, the very elements of creation turning against themselves. Fire consumes ice. Sea swallows land. Sky collapses into flame. The Norse saw in Surt not just a mythic figure, but the inevitability of entropy itself. The truth that everything made will one day be unmade. And yet, Even as we shudder at his image, there is something awe-inspiring in Surt's fire. It is a force that breaks the old, the blaze that clears a way for new growth. His destruction is not random, it is destiny. Without him, the prophecy remains incomplete. With him, the cycle closes and begins anew. Thus, Surt was not merely an enemy to the gods. He was a reminder to mortals and immortals alike that nothing is permanent, not even the heavens. His sword was not just a weapon, it was time itself, cutting through eras, burning away illusions of eternity, reducing all things to ash so that life might start again. And so, in the final reckoning, when Naglfar sails, when Loki leads the dead, when Fenrir and Jörmungandr rise, it is Surt who will end the story. His fire will consume all, but from that fire, the world will be reborn. But before his flames rise, before the final battle begins, the gods must face the moment they dreaded most, the breaking of bonds, the release of monsters, and the march toward the field of destiny, Vigrid, where the end of all things would be decided. The prophecies of Ragnarok did not begin with fire, nor with the clash of armies. They began with the sound of bonds breaking. For the gods had long feared the monsters that Loki had brought into the world, and they had done everything in their power to contain them. But destiny is not so easily chained, and the time would come when every fetter would snap, every prison would crumble, and the horrors buried beneath the earth and sea would rise again. The first to break free was Fenrir, the monstrous wolf. For years he had been bound by the magical fetter Gleipnir, forged by dwarfs from impossibilities. The sound of a cat's footsteps, the roots of mountains, the beard of a woman, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. Thin and silken it appeared, yet it held stronger than any iron. The gods had deceived Fenrir into wearing it, losing Tyr's hand in the process, and ever since, the wolf's hatred festered. When the signs of Ragnarok began, the endless winter, the trembling of Yggdrasil, the fetter began to weaken. With a roar that split the heavens, Fenrir snapped Gleipnir as if it were thread. His jaws gaped so wide that they scraped the sky and the earth, and fire poured from his eyes and nostrils. Nothing could sate his hunger now. His path led directly to Odin himself, for it was foretold that the wolf would devour the All-Father. Next came Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent. Cast into the sea as a child, he had grown until his body encircled the world, his tail clasped in his jaws. When Ragnarok approached, he released his grip, thrashing in fury, sending towering waves to swallow coastlines and drown whole lands. Poison dripped from his fangs, spreading through sea and skylight, tainting the very air. He rose from the depths, coiling and uncoiling, his massive body shaking Midgard to its foundations. For Thor, this was the moment he had awaited, the final confrontation with his greatest foe. From the holes of the dead, hell stirred. Half-living, half-rotting, she had ruled in silence for ages, her cold gaze overseeing those who had died dishonorably or without glory. Now, with the gates of Helheim flung open, she marshaled her legions, the dead who had not reached Valhalla, the countless multitudes of plague, famine, and age. They marched beneath black banners, their steps heavy and soundless, their eyes hollow. And at their head was Hel herself, pale as bone on one side, dark as shadow on the other. Her army swelled Naglfar, the dread ship made from the nails of the dead, a vessel so vast it could carry entire nations to war. But these were not the only bonds to break. Deep beneath the earth, where Loki himself had been bound in torment, his chains too shattered. The venom-dripping serpent that tormented him recoiled, and Loki rose, laughing, his eyes alight with vengeance. He climbed aboard Naglfar, seizing the helm, and with him sailed giants, monsters, and the restless dead. The ship cut through storm-tossed seas, its black sail filled with the winds of doom. Every stroke of its oars brought the end closer. Even nature itself was unbound. The wolf skull, who had chased the sun across the heavens since time began, at last caught his prey, devouring her and plunging the world into darkness. His brother Hati seized the moon, swallowing its silver light. The stars vanished from the sky, falling like sparks into the void. The ordered rhythm of day and night, of sun and moon, collapsed. The world reeled in eternal twilight, lit only by the glow of fire and lightning. In the midst of this chaos, the rainbow bridge Bifrost shuddered. For centuries it had borne the gods between realms, shimmering in radiant color. But as the fire giants of Muspelheim marched, led by Surt himself, Their heat consumed the bridge. It cracked, blazed, and fell in shards, leaving only smoke and flame in the heavens. The gods were cut off, their link between worlds destroyed. The breaking of bonds was not only physical but symbolic. It was the unraveling of every oath, every safeguard, every fragile thread that had held the 9 worlds together. The order the gods had fought to preserve collapsed, leaving only raw chaos. This was the essence of Ragnarok, not a sudden disaster, but a total unraveling, a world that no longer obeyed its own rules. And yet, in this maelstrom of destruction, there was a strange sense of inevitability. For the Norse did not imagine Ragnarok as a surprise, a catastrophe that caught the gods unaware. They had always known this day would come. Odin had sought its knowledge in the wisdom of the seers. The Norns had woven it into the tapestry of fate. Even the monsters knew their roles, their destinies written since their births. Fenrir was born to devour Odin. Jörmungandr was born to fall against Thor. Loki was born to betray, Hel to unleash the dead, Surt to burn the world. Their bonds had only delayed the inevitable. The imagery of these broken bonds would have been especially vivid to the Norse, a people who lived by oaths and fealty. To break one's word was additional, to shatter a bond was to invite chaos. And here, in the twilight of the gods, every bond was broken, between gods and giants, between life and death, between earth and sky. The universe itself had become faithless. One by one, the monsters rose, their freedom echoing like cracks in ice before it breaks. Fenrir howled, Jörmungandr churned, Hel marched, Loki steered Naglfar, and Surt strode with fire. The stage was set. The armies gathered. The field of destiny, Vigrid, awaited. There, in the vast plain stretching further than sight, gods and monsters alike would clash in a final, terrible reckoning. It was not simply a war. It was the end of all stories, the breaking of all cycles, the moment when fate itself revealed its hand. The gods armed themselves, mortals trembled, and even Yggdrasil groaned beneath the weight of what was to come. The bonds were broken, the monsters were unleashed, and now there was no turning back. The march toward Vigrid had begun. When the bonds broke and the monsters rose, all paths led to one place, Vigrid, the great plain destined to host a final battle. It stretched farther than the eye could see, a wasteland of ash and dust, where no tree grew and no bird sang. Its silence was ancient, as though the earth itself had been holding its breath for this very moment. For ages, Skald had whispered of Vigrid, describing it as vast enough to contain every army of gods, giants, monsters, and the dead. Now, at last, the prophecy came alive, and the plain became the stage upon which the fate of all creation would be decided. From every corner of the 9 worlds, armies gathered. On one side marched the gods and their chosen warriors. The easy, grim and resolute, armed themselves in Asgard. Odin donned his golden helm, Gungnir in hand, his one eye gleaming with foreknowledge and determination. Beside him rode the Einherjar, the souls of warriors who had died in battle and been chosen by the Valkyries. For centuries they had trained in Valhalla, fighting and feasting, their skills sharpened for this single day. Now they rode forth, shining like a storm of steel, their war cries echoing across the void. Thor prepared himself for his greatest trial. His hammer Mjolnir, the bane of giants, pulsed with thunder. He stood unflinching, knowing his fate was to meet the Midgard serpent. His chariot, drawn by his goats Tangrisnir and Tangjosta, crackled with lightning as it carried him toward Vigrid. Though he laughed and roared as was his nature, a shadow lay heavy upon him. He knew victory would be bought at the cost of his own life. Yet no hesitation touched him, for this was his purpose. Frey, the god of fertility and peace, armed himself with a sword that shone with its own light. Once it had been a weapon without peer, but in his desire for love he had given it away. Now he faced Ragnarok weaponless, forced to fight with only a stag's antler against Surt the fire giant. Still, he did not waver. His courage was steady, even as he foresaw his doom in the flames. Tyr, one-handed and fierce, prepared to face Garm, the monstrous hound of hell. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, read at his gleaming horn Galahorn, which had already sounded the call to arms. Each god took his place, grimly aware that this would be their final stand. On the other side came the forces of destruction, vast and terrible. Fenrir strode forward, towering above all, each step shaking the earth. His jaws opened wide enough to swallow the horizon, fire blazing from his eyes. Beside him ride Jörmungandr, his coils stretching across land and sea, his venom dripping into the soil. His very breath poisoned the air, withering grass and choking the wind. From the sea came Naglfar, the ship of dead men's nails. Its black sails billowed with the winds of doom, carrying Loki and his brood. Giants crowded its deck, frost giants with icy spears, fire giants blazing with heat, mountain giants wielding clubs of stone. At the helm stood Loki, his face twisted with malice and triumph, savoring the moment of vengeance he had long awaited. From Helheim came the legions of the dead. Rank upon rank of pale figures marched, hollow-eyed, their armor rusted, their weapons dull yet unyielding. They filled the plain like a tide of shadows, their silence more dreadful than any roar. And above them loomed Hel herself, her half-living, half-decayed visage commanding terror and sorrow alike. From Muspelheim came the fire giants, their swords flaming, their eyes glowing like molten stone. At their head strode Surt, taller than mountains, his fire sword bright enough to blind. He was a destined destroyer, the one who would end the world in fire. Each step he took scorched the earth, leaving behind rivers of flame. His arrival was a final seal upon the prophecy. There could be no turning back. As these hosts gathered, even the natural world bore witness. The sun and moon were gone, swallowed by wolves, leaving only a dim twilight across Vigrid. Lightning danced through dark clouds, storms raged without rain, and Yggdrasil groaned as though its roots were tearing. The air was thick with the smell of fire and salt, with venom and decay. It was as if the 9 worlds themselves were collapsing into this single plane, converging for one final reckoning. When both armies stood arrayed, silence fell. For a brief moment, the chaos stilled. The gods looked upon their foes. The monsters and giants looked upon their prey. Each knew their fate, for it had been foretold. Yet still they stood, heart steady, weapons ready. The silence stretched, heavy and unbearable, until the sound of Heimdall's horn split the air once more, long and piercing, a final call that shattered the stillness. And then the plain erupted in war. The clash was beyond anything mortals could imagine. Steel rang against steel, thunder cracked against flame, venom hissed against lightning. The ground shook as giants fell, the sky split as gods clashed with monsters. Blood soaked the dust of Vigrid, seeping into the earth, mingling with fire and poison. The cries of the dying mingled with the roars of beasts and the shouts of gods, a cacophony that drowned the world. Everywhere battles raged, Thor against Jörmungandr, Odin against Fenrir, Frey against Surt, Tyr against Garm, Heimdall against Loki. Each struggle was a story unto itself, each blow the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. This was not merely a battle of strength, but a battle of fate, a reckoning written since the dawn of time. The plain of Vigrid had become a crucible, a forge in which the world would be unmade. No victory was possible, no survival assured. Only destruction and transformation awaited. And yet, even in the face of certain doom, neither side faltered. For gods and giants alike, this was their destiny, their purpose, their end. The armies had gathered. The final war had begun. The stage was set for the deaths of gods, the ruin of worlds, and the dawn of something new. The plain of Vigrid shook as gods and monsters clashed, but all eyes, whether of god, giant, or ghost, turned at some point toward the heart of the battlefield, where the most terrible confrontation was unfolding. There stood Odin, the All-Father, king of the Aesir, cloaked in wisdom and prophecy. And there, facing him, loomed the beast he had feared since the beginning of time, Fenrir, the wolf-born of Loki, a creature of such power that even the chains of the gods could not bind him forever. This duel was not merely a battle, it was a fulfillment of destiny. Odin had long known his end. In his endless pursuit of knowledge, he had sacrificed his eye for wisdom and hung upon Yggdrasil for 9 nights to gain the runes. He had sought out the seers, the Norns, and the whispers of the dead. From all of them he had learned the same truth. He would die at Ragnarok, swallowed by the jaws of Fenrir. And yet here he stood, unflinching, spear in hand, ready to meet his fate not with despair, but with defiance. Fenrir advanced, each step shaking the ground. His fur bristled like a forest of spears, his eyes burned with hatred, and his jaws stretched wider than the span of mountains. He was no ordinary beast, but the very embodiment of chaos and vengeance. Once bound by the gods with a silken fetter Gleipnir, he had endured humiliation and betrayal. He had felt the hand of Tyr severed in his mouth, and he had sworn vengeance. Now the hour had come, and his hatred blazed like fire. The Einherjar, those countless warriors Odin had gathered in Valhalla for centuries, rushed to their lord's aid. They formed a wall of shields, spears bristling, their battle cries echoing across the plain. But Fenrir tore through them like paper. His jaws snapped, and entire companies vanished into his maw. His claws swept, and warriors were crushed like insects. The Einherjar fought bravely, but none could halt the beast's advance. Odin raised Gungnir, his spear of destiny, said never to miss its mark. He hurled it with all the strength of the Old Father, and it struck Fenrir's hide with a flash like lightning. Yet the beast only roared, the spear lodging in his flesh but failing to bring him down. The prophecy had decreed it. No weapon could stop Fenrir. Odin mounted Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed, and charged, striking blow after blow. He moved with the wisdom of ages, the skill of countless battles, his one eye burning with unshakable resolve. Yet against the wolf, it was as if the tide itself were resisting him. Fenrir lunged, his jaws snapping, his breath hot and foul, and the earth quaked as they collided. For a moment, it seemed Odin might prevail. His courage was immense, his presence awe-inspiring, and every strike carried the weight of divine authority. Yet Fenrir was destiny made flesh. He had been born to devour, born to end the reign of the All-Father. His fury was endless, his hunger insatiable. Odin fought with unmatched skill, but slowly, inevitably, Fenrir drove him back. The other gods could see it, but none could reach him in time. Each was locked in their own battle, each bound by their own fate. Thor wrestled with Jörmungandr. Frey faced Tyr battled Garm. Heimdall awaited Loki. The All-Father was alone, as he had always known he would be. Then it happened. With a roar that split the air, Fenrir lunged, his jaws opening so wide they seemed to blot out the sky. Odin struck one final time with Gungnir, but it was too late. The wolf's teeth closed around him, swallowing him whole. The All-Father was gone. The god who had ruled for ages, who had sacrificed and suffered to preserve order, vanished into the darkness of Fenrir's maw. For a heartbeat, silence rippled across the plain. Even amid the chaos of battle, the death of Odin was felt like a shudder through the fabric of the 9 worlds. The ravens hugged and Munin screamed in anguish. Sleipnir reared and vanished into the storm. The Einherjar faltered. The prophecy was fulfilled. The father of gods and men had fallen. But destiny did not end there. For even as Fenrir roared in triumph, his victory was not complete. Out of the ranks of the Einherjar stepped Vaya, Odin's silent son. Little spoken of in myth, Vaya had long been known as a god of vengeance, the quiet avenger who would rise when all others fell. He wore upon his foot a special shoe, fashioned through the ages from the scraps of leather discarded by shoemakers across the world, a detail passed down in myth, strange yet potent. Vaya strode forward, his silence more terrible than any war cry. As Fenrir turned toward him, jaws dripping with blood, Vaya leapt. He thrust one foot into the wolf's gaping maw, pressing down with the strength of gods and fate itself. With his hand, he seized Fenrir's upper jaw, with the other, his lower. With a force beyond reckoning, he tore. Fenrir howled, thrashing, his power immense, but Vaya was immovable. Slowly, inexorably, he wrenched the jaws apart until they split, and with one final, shuddering crack, the wolf was torn asunder. Fenrir, devourer of gods, destroyer of worlds, fell dead upon the plain. Vaya stood over the carcass, his face expressionless, his silence unbroken. He had avenged his father, but the cost was immeasurable. Odin was gone, and with him the age of the gods. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but the price of vengeance was emptiness. The victory was hollow, for the world was still unraveling, still burning, still doomed. The sight of Odin's fall and Vaya's vengeance sent ripples across Vigrid. Some fought with renewed fury, others with despair. Yet nothing could undo what had been done. The All-Father was dead, and the end was unstoppable. In that moment, the essence of Ragnarok revealed itself. It was not merely the death of gods, nor the destruction of worlds, but the inexorable truth that even the greatest, the wisest, and the most powerful cannot escape fate. Odin had spent his life seeking knowledge to delay or avert the end, yet all his wisdom had led him to the very jaws he had foreseen. And as Fenrir's carcass lay still upon the ground, and Vyas stood in silence, the world trembled on the edge of total ruin. For though the wolf was slain, other battles still raged, and other dooms had yet to fall. While Odin's fate was sealed in Fenrir's jaws, another clash thundered across Vigrid, a confrontation as old as the world itself. Thor, the Stormbringer, the strongest of the Aesir, had always been destined to meet his greatest enemy, Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent. Born of Loki, brother to Fenrir and Hel, the serpent had been cast into the sea by Odin, where he grew so vast his body encircled the entire world, biting his own tail. Now, at Ragnarok, he had released his tail, uncoiling his monstrous length, and slithered onto the battlefield to meet his foe. Thor knew this battle was his to fight alone. No other god, no Einherjar, could match the serpent's scale of venom. His hammer, Mjolnir, blazed with thunder and lightning, sparking in his mighty grip. His chariot, drawn by his goats, roared across the battlefield in streaks of light. He was the embodiment of raw strength, the defender of gods and men. And yet he also knew, as Odin had known, that prophecy promised not his survival, but his doom. The serpent rose, its coils darkening the plain, its scales glinting with a sheen of poison. Its eyes glowed like molten gold, its tongue flickered with venom that dripped to the earth, sizzling and burning holes in the ground. When it reared up, it seemed to blot out the sky, a living mountain of rage and hatred. Jörmungandr had always been Thor's shadow, his destined nemesis. They had met before, at the fishing expedition when Thor nearly pulled the beast from the sea, only for fate to deny him the final blow. Now there would be no delay, no retreat. The serpent struck first. Its massive body crashed against the earth, sending shockwaves that threw warriors and giants aside like straw. Venom sprayed from its fangs, a cloud of death that poisoned the air. Thor roared, swinging Mjolnir with a force that split the storm above, lightning crackling through the serpent's scales. The hammer struck, and the sound was like mountains shattering. Jörmungandr writhed, the ground heaving beneath its coils, yet still it came. Again and again, Thor struck. Each blow resounded like thunder, each strike leaving cracks in the serpent's armor of scales. The sky itself seemed to echo their struggle, lightning flashing in rhythm with Thor's attacks. Yet the serpent's body was endless. For every strike that wounded it, another coil tightened around the battlefield, squeezing, constricting, crushing. Warriors screamed as they were caught and snapped like twigs. Giants fell beneath its weight, and still the duel raged. Jörmungandr spat venom, rivers of it pouring onto the battlefield. The poison hissed as it struck the ground, melting stone and steel, searing flesh. Thor waded through it, lightning crackling around him, the poison burning his skin. But he pressed forward, bellowing defiance. He was a storm incarnate, a god of war who would not yield. At last, Thor closed the distance. With a roar, he leapt upon the serpent's head, Mjolnir raised high. He brought it down with all his strength, a blow so mighty it echoed across the 9 worlds. The hammer cracked the serpent's skull, splitting scales and bone, driving deep into its brain. Jörmungandr convulsed, its body lashing wildly, toppling giants, crushing armies beneath its thrashing coils. Its death throes shook the earth and sea alike, a convulsion of rage and agony. With one final strike, Thor shattered the serpent's skull, and Jörmungandr collapsed upon the plain, its massive body falling like a mountain. The Midgard serpent, encircler of the world, enemy of the gods, was dead. But prophecy is cruel, and victory does not come without its cost. As the serpent's corpse lay still, Thor staggered. He had stood triumphant, his hammer still glowing, his heart still beating with the fury of battle. Yet the venom of Jörmungandr coursed through him. The serpent's poison, spat upon him during the fight, now burned in his veins. Thor stumbled back 9 steps. Each step was heavy, his breath ragged, his skin blackened where the venom had touched. Still, he did not cry out. He stood defiant until the end, the hammer still in his grip, his gaze still fierce. On the 9th step, his legs gave way, and the thunderer fell. There, beside the body of his enemy, Thor breathed his last. The greatest warrior of the gods, the protector of mankind, was gone. He had slain the Midgard serpent, but at the cost of his own life. The battlefield trembled with the weight of his death. To the giants, it was triumph, for the strongest of the gods had fallen. To the easy, it was despair, for their protector was no more. To mortals who would hear the tale in later ages, it was all the image of a god who fought to the end, who slew his destined foe even though it meant his death. Thor's fall carried a meaning deeper than loss. It was the ultimate truth of Ragnarok, that even the strongest, even the most heroic, cannot escape fate. His defiance, his courage, and his sacrifice became his final gift, a legacy of strength in the face of doom. And so, on the plain of Vigrid, the serpent lay broken, the thunderer fallen. The battle raged on, gods and monsters locked in their final struggles. Yet the deaths of Odin and Thor marked the turning point. The greatest of the gods were gone, and the fate of the 9 worlds now trembled on the edge of destruction. But still the fire burned, and still the shadows moved. For while the wolf and serpent were dead, greater doom remained. Across the battlefield, Surt, the fire giant, raised his flaming sword, and Frey, unarmed, stepped forward to meet him. The death of Thor shook the plain of Vigrid, but before the shock could fade, another confrontation rose in fire and fury. From the south marched Surt, the fire giant of Muspelheim, his very presence a furnace of destruction. His sword blazed with the heat of suns, a weapon said to be older than the gods themselves. Its flames licked the air, scorching the sky, casting the battlefield in an infernal glow. Wherever Surt walked, the earth cracked, rivers of fire spilled from his steps, and the very air trembled. He was not merely a warrior. He was the end itself, destined to set the world ablaze. Against him strode Frey, the god of fertility, prosperity, and peace. He had once been a bringer of joy, a symbol of harmony between men and gods, a deity whose presence made fields fertile and marriages blessed. But now, in the twilight of the world, he came not as a giver of peace, but as a warrior stripped of his greatest strength. For Frey had given away his sword, his matchless blade that fought of its own accord, in exchange for the hand of the giantess Ger, the woman he loved. That gift of love had left him vulnerable, weaponless on the day he most needed it. Still, Frey did not falter. He armed himself instead with a stag's antler, a weapon strange and primal, symbolic of life itself. It was fragile compared to Surt's fire sword, yet Frey held it with resolve. He knew the prophecy. He knew this would be his final battle. But he stepped forward regardless, a god who had chosen love and life over endless war, now facing the embodiment of fire and ruin. The two met in the heart of Vigrid, where fire and ash swirled together. Surt's sword roared as he swung, flames spilling like rivers across the plain. Frey parried with his antler, sparks flying, the clash of their blows reverberating like the cracking of the world. Again and again, Surt's fiery blade descended, each strike a storm of destruction, each swing enough to cleave mountains. And again, Frey met it, his antler glowing red-hot from the force, yet still unbroken. Their battle was unlike the brutal savagery of Thor and Jörmungandr, or the tragic inevitability of Odin and Fenrir. It was symbolic, a clash between creation and destruction, fertility and fire, life and death. Frey fought not for vengeance or for glory, but for the fragile beauty of the world he had nurtured. Every strike he made was an act of defiance, a refusal to yield to annihilation. But Surt was inexorable. He was the doom of worlds, the flame that consumed all. Frey's antler cracked, splintering under the onslaught. His strength was vast, but he was no longer armed as he once had been. Blow by blow, Surt pressed him back, his laughter booming like firestorms. At last, with one final stroke, the fire giant's sword cleaved through Frey's defense, cutting deep into his body. The god of peace staggered. The antler fell from his hand, shattering upon the scorched ground. For a moment, he stood, blooded but proud, gazing upon his foe with unbroken spirit. Then he fell, collapsing into the ashes of Vigrid. The battlefield mourned in its silence. The god who had brought joy, who had blessed the harvest, who had chosen love above power, was gone. His sacrifice was not in vain. He had stood against Surt long enough to delay him, to hold the fire giant back so that others might fight their battles. But his death signaled the last unraveling of the world. For now Surt strode unchecked, his sword burning brighter than ever, his path clear toward the final destruction. Frey's fall carried with it a profound irony. He had given away his sword for love, an act of vulnerability that revealed his humanity amid divinity. Some later poets would say this was his true greatness, that he chose compassion over conquest, life over domination. Yet it was his very choice that doomed him in battle. Was it folly, or was it wisdom? To the Norse mind, it was both. It was a recognition that even gods are bound by the consequences of their choices. And with his death, the fragile balance tipped fully toward destruction. For now the last of the great gods had fallen. Odin was gone. Thor was gone. Frey lay slain. Tyr battled Garm in his own death struggle. Heimdall and Loki prepared for their final clash. The battlefield was becoming a graveyard of gods, the divine blood soaking the soil of Vigrid. Surt stood tall, his laughter rolling like thunder, his flaming sword raised high. Around him, fire spread, licking across the plain, igniting the bodies of the fallen. The heat grew unbearable, the sky glowed red, and the prophecy whispered by the Norns began to take its ultimate shape. For when all the gods had fallen, when the enemies of order had triumphed, Surt's role was clear. He would set fire to the 9 worlds. The cosmos itself would burn, and nothing would remain. And yet, even as flames spread and despair deepened, there remained a sense of solemn dignity in Frey's fall. His sacrifice, his choice of love, his courage to face doom with nothing but an antler in hand, all of it stood as a testament to the Norse vision of honor. Ragnarok was not about victory. It was about defiance in the face of fate, about choosing to stand even when the end was certain. The god of fertility lay fallen, the fire giant still advancing. But the battle was not over. Across the plain, Loki faced Heimdall, and the strangest of destinies awaited them both. Wildfire consumed the battlefield where Surt and Frey clashed. Another duel began on the plain of Vigrid, one that had been written in prophecy long before the first war drum of Ragnarok sounded. From among the chaos of giants and gods, monsters and men, 2 figures sought each other out as if drawn by destiny. Loki, the trickster, betrayer, and father of monsters, and Heimdall, the ever-vigilant guardian of Asgard and keeper of the Bifrost, now stood face to face. It was inevitable, for though their rivalry had spanned ages, though they were opposites in every sense, chaos against order, deceit against vigilance, the prophecy had always declared that neither would survive the final day. Their duel was not simply personal. It was cosmic. It was a clash of shadow and watchlight, of lies and truth, of betrayal and loyalty. Heimdall stood tall, shining with the light of his destiny. His armor gleamed like polished silver even under the smoke-darkened sky. His eyes, sharpened by foresight, pierced through the battlefield haze, never wavering, never deceived. He was a watcher, the one who saw all things, the one who heard the grass grow and the wool on sheep's backs. Even now, amid the chaos of Ragnarok, his perception was absolute. Loki, in contrast, was a shifting shadow, his form alive with trickery. He had worn many faces in his long life, of friend, of betrayer, of monster, of god. His smile was crooked, filled with venomous charm. His hands itched with restless energy, as though he might transform at any moment into serpent, bird, or mist. Yet in this final duel, there was no disguise. He faced Heimdall openly, his eyes burning with bitterness, fury, and perhaps a flicker of regret. "You always watched me," Loki said, his voice carrying over the clash of the battlefield. "Always suspicious, always peering, never trusting." And rightly so, Heimdall replied, his voice steady as stone. "I saw the lies behind your smiles. I saw the wolf you loosed, the serpent you birthed, the doom you nurtured. Today, it ends." Loki laughed, though it was hollow. "Ends? You think ending me will save this world? Look around you. Heimdall. Odin is gone. Thor lies poisoned. Frey is dead. The world burns because of me, because of my children. Whether I live or die, Ragnarok is already won." "Then let it be won with your blood upon the ground," Heimdall said, drawing his blade, which glowed with a pale light, cold and clear as dawn. They clashed with the fury of fate itself. Heimdall's strikes were precise, each blow aimed to cut through deception. His blade sang, flashing like lightning, a weapon wielded with perfect clarity. Loki met him with cunning, twisting and dodging, his movement slippery as smoke. Where Heimdall struck true, Loki bent away. Where Heimdall's blade cut air, Loki countered with daggers sharp as his wit. The battle swirled across the ash-choked plain. Heimdall struck, and Loki transformed into a serpent, coiling and striking with venom-dripping fangs. Heimdall seized him, forcing him back, blade flashing. Loki dissolved into mist, then reformed behind him, slashing with daggers. Heimdall turned, ever vigilant, never caught unaware, parrying and pressing forward. It was not brute strength that defined their struggle, but inevitability, for neither could escape the prophecy that bound them. Each blow they exchanged echoed with the knowledge that this duel was their last. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to fulfill destiny. At one point, Heimdall struck Loki through the side, his blade piercing deep. Loki staggered but laughed, spitting blood. "You wound me, Watcher, but can you kill what is chaos itself?" Heimdall said nothing, pressing forward. His silence was a silence of duty, of inevitability. Loki struck back with venomous cunning. His dagger slipped past Heimdall's guard, biting into his ribs. Heimdall gasped but did not falter. Blood streamed down his armor, but his eyes remained clear, unclouded. The two grappled now, locked together in fury and exhaustion, neither giving ground. Heimdall's blade plunged into Loki's chest even as Loki's dagger sank into Heimdall's heart. Both cried out, the sound carrying across the battlefield like the breaking of worlds. They fell together, crashing into the ash and fire, locked in each other's grasp. Loki's laughter faded into a ragged breath, his eyes dimming, though the curve of his lips remained mocking, as though even in death he claimed victory. Heimdall's gaze was steady to the end, his last breath escaping with calm inevitability. Thus the prophecy was fulfilled. The trickster and the guardian, the betrayer and the watcher, both lay dead upon the field of Vigrid. Their deaths marked not just the end of their long rivalry, but the extinguishing of the last light of vigilance against deceit. The gods had lost their guardian. The world had lost its trickster. Order and chaos fell together, as bound as they had always been. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to pause, as if acknowledging their deaths. The fire roared, the giants howled, the corpses of gods lay scattered, but in that silence it was clear Ragnarok had claimed nearly all. Odin devoured, Thor slain, Frey fallen, Tyr bled out, and now Heimdall and Loki gone. Only Surt remained triumphant, his fire rising, his sword blazing, ready to fulfill his final task, the burning of the 9 worlds. But even as flames surged and the cosmos trembled, there was no despair among the dead gods, for they had known this fate. Ragnarok was not a story of hope for survival. It was a story of courage in the face of certain doom. Heimdall's final gaze, Loki's mocking smile, Thor's poisoned fall, Odin's desperate struggle, all of it was testament to the Norse belief that even at the end of all things, it was better to fight and fall with honor than to yield. And so the battlefield grew quiet of gods. Only fire remained. Only Surt stood, towering and terrible, his flaming sword poised to ignite creation itself. The final act of Ragnarok was about to begin, the cleansing fire that would destroy all, making way for what was yet to come. The plain of Vigrid, once filled with gods, giants, and beasts locked in cosmic battle, now lay heavy with silence. The clash of weapons had dimmed, the cries of war had faded, and the ground was soaked in the blood of divinities. Odin had fallen to Fenrir. Thor had slain the serpent but perished from its venom. Frey lay dead. His blade denied him. Tyr bled beside Gama, locked in mutual destruction. Loki and Heimdall, the trickster and the watchman, had struck each other down. All that remained of the old order was ash, ruin, and the one figure who had always waited for this very moment, Surt, the fire giant of Muspelheim. Towering over the wreckage of gods and monsters alike, Surt stood with his sword burning brighter than the sun itself. His presence was not one of triumph, but of inevitability. For Surt was no mere conqueror. He was the executor of destiny, the living embodiment of fire's final purpose. From the very beginning of time, he had been written into the end. When Odin first sought prophecy from evolvers, when the Norns carved runes of fate into Yggdrasil's roots, they all spoke of this. Surt's sword would fall, and the worlds would burn. The battlefield seemed to bend under his presence, the air shimmering with unbearable heat. The seas hissed and retreated, steam rising in plumes. The very sky cracked, not with thunder, but with the splitting of creation itself under the weight of fire. In his eyes burned not rage, nor hatred, but a steady, consuming certainty. Surt was not cruel. He was not merciful. He was fire. And fire does what it must. It devours, it transforms, it cleanses. He lifted his flaming sword, and with it came the roar of Muspelheim's eternal blaze. The sword was older than gods, older than giants. It was a weapon of dissolution, forged not for battle, but for the final act of destruction. As he raised it, the ground trembled, the mountains quaked, and the branches of Yggdrasil groaned as though the great world tree itself felt the coming doom. With a single stroke, Surt swung his blade, and the 9 worlds ignited. Flames rushed outward in waves, devouring the battlefield first. The corpses of gods and monsters were consumed, their divine essence burning like dry kindling. Fenrir's great body was reduced to ash. The serpent's coil smoked and dissolved into fire. The glittering halls of Asgard caught like tinder, their golden wall collapsing into molten rivers. The Bifrost shattered, its rainbow bridge consumed in sparks and ash, falling into the void. The fire spread further still, racing across Midgard, engulfing forests, cities, and seas. Human settlements burned in moments, their cries rising with the smoke. Mountains melted, rivers boiled, oceans surged with steam. The flames leapt outward beyond Midgard, consuming Vanaheim, Alfheim, Jotunheim, Niflheim, and even the distant cold of Hell. No realm was spared. Surt's fire was not a weapon of war. It was an ending woven into the fabric of time. Even Yggdrasil itself, the great ash tree that bound the 9 worlds together, shuddered as its branches caught fire. The leaves curled and blackened, the trunk groaned and cracked, and sparks flew through the void. Beneath its roots, the Norns wept as their carved runes of fate burned away, their work undone in a single sweep of flame. All prophecy, all destiny, all weaving of time dissolved into consuming blaze. And yet, within this destruction, there was no chaos. The fire moved with eerie calm, as though guided by purpose. To the Norse, this was not meaningless ruin. It was necessary renewal. Just as a forest must burn for new growth, just as fields must be cut bare before they yield again, so too must the cosmos be consumed before it could be remade. Surt was not merely a destroyer. He was a harbinger of rebirth. In the myths, it is said that when Surt's flames had finished their work, the seas would rise, covering the charred land. Out of the water, a new world would emerge, fresh and green. Fields would grow without sowing, rivers would flow with sweetness, and the sky would be clear once more. The sun, though slain, would have a daughter who would take her place, shining even brighter than before. And though the old gods had perished, a few would return. Balder and Hr, reconciled after their tragic fate, would walk together in peace. Vaya and Vali, Odin's surviving sons, would rise from the ashes, carrying on the legacy of their father. Thor's children, Moi and Magni, would inherit his hammer, bearing its weight in the new dawn. Even humanity would survive. 2 figures, a man and a woman, Lif and Lifrisi, would hide themselves deep within Yggdrasil, drinking the morning dew, spared from the cleansing fire. When the flames subsided, they would step forth into the reborn world, their children populating the earth once more. From destruction, life would return. From fire, fertility. From the death of gods, the rebirth of men. But none of this was visible yet on the battlefield. All that could be seen was fire. All that could be felt was heat. All that could be heard was the roar of Surt's sword as it split the cosmos. In that moment, the end was absolute. Every structure, every star, every living thing that had once existed within the 9 worlds was swallowed by the cleansing blaze. The gods had fought valiantly, but they had not fought to win. They had fought to fulfill their part in the story, to hold back chaos until the final moment, to ensure that when the fire came, it came as destiny, not as accident. And now, with their sacrifice complete, the fire could do its work. Thus Surt stood at the center of creation's pyre, his flaming sword raised high, his silhouette framed by the burning of worlds. He was not hailed, nor cursed, for no one remained to speak. He was simply there, the last giant, the last witness, the last act of Ragnarok. And as the fire consumed everything, silence returned. The end of one cosmos was complete, and the possibility of another had just begun.